Chapter 1. The ink-stained fan dusk had fallen over London, and a soft glow danced through the tall sash windows of Hercule Poirot's flat in Mayfair. The drawing-room was arranged with the fastidious order one might expect of its owner, damask. Curtains drawn back just so, porcelain vases aligned in perfect symmetry on polished mahogany tables, and a crystal chandelier casting prismatic sparks across oriental rugs. Tonight, however, there was an undercurrent of excitement rather than mere elegance. The crowning jewel of the season's collector circle, an imperial French fan once owned by Empress Eugenie, had been consigned to Poirot for its public debut. Its mother-of-pearl sticks, delicately hand-painted with the imperial crests of Napoleon III, promised an extraordinary spectacle, though known primarily for his little grey cells. Poirot was also, in his own refined way, a connoisseur of beauty. He had invited a select cadre of London's elite aristocrats, art dealers, and social luminaries to witness the fan's unveiling, certain its provenance and artistry would enthrall even the most jaded collectors. Among the assembled guests were Captain Arthur Hastings, the trusted chronicler of Poirot's exploits, Lady Agatha Bexley, whose discreet fortune underwrote many of England's grandest soirees, Colonel Sebastian Forth, a retired military attaché, with an unerring eye for antiquities, Miss Violet Sinclair, a debutante and daughter of a celebrated antiquarian, and Mr. Archibald Gray, an enigmatic financier with a penchant for rare curios. As the final guests arrived, Poirot took his place by the mantel. His slender figure impeccably tailored, his moustaches waxed to precise symmetry. Beside him, on a velvet cushion, lay the delicate fan, its intricate carvings glowing softly in the lamplight. A hush fell as Lady Bexley stepped forward, ready to draw aside the silk cover. But before she could touch it, the lamps flickered on in that brief instant of shadow. The fan vanished. Gasps rippled through the room. Lady Bexley's hand hovered over empty space. Colonel Ford's eyes darted to the windows. None had been opened. Hastings rushed forward, peering beneath the table. Mr. Gray stepped back against the wall, expression unreadable. Poirot raised a single brow, his hands clasped calmly behind his back. Mies Amos, he intoned quietly. It appears our fan has walked from its resting place, but I do not believe it walked on its own. Attention gripped the gathering. Instruments of sight and sound, the chandeliers, crystals, the crackle of the hearths seemed to hold their breath. Poirot surveyed his company, Hastings pale with astonishment, Lady Bexley, lips pressed tight, Ford, mask of composure cracking at the edges, Sinclair cheeks flushed with indignation, and Gray, still unreadable. "Let us not panic," Poirot continued. "There is method even in this chaos. I ask that no one leave this room until we have discovered what has occurred." He nodded to Hastings, who moved to secure the door. Keen gaze, meanwhile, moved from face to face, noting micro-expressions, the quick flicker of a guilty glance, the stiff posture of one concealing more than circumstance, the subtle tremor of a hand brushing a lapel. In that instant, the gears of his little grey cells began to turn. "Madame," he said, addressing Miss Sinclair with gentle courtesy, "might I trouble you to recount exactly where you were standing when the lamps went out? And you, Colonel, what did you observe?" One by one, Poirot began his preliminary interviews as servants hastened in to restore full illumination. In the meantime, the fan remained lost, its disappearance transforming an elegant soirée into the scene of a baffling crime. Yet Poirot did not appear flustered. Rather, he seemed to relish the challenge. as if the vanishing of an ink-stained fan were a puzzle destined to showcase the true power of his deductive mind. Thus, on this evening of cultivated refinement, a mystery was born, and none would suspect how deeply it would cut into the secret lives of those present. Chapter 2. The First Closer Drawing Room. Once alive with polite laughter and the clink of champagne glasses, now lay hushed and expectant under the soft lamplight. Hercule Poirot stood near the mantel, his steely grey eyes inspecting every detail, the tilt of a vase, the way the rug fibres had shifted, the faintest smudge on the polished floor. Captain Hastings hovered uncertainly at his side, his concern evident as he observed the assembled guests, each struggling to maintain composure. "Mon ami Poirot," murmured, "the disappearance of the fan cannot be so simple as darkness and sleight of hand. Notice, Hastings, that Lady Bexley's silk gloves display no sign of powder or dust one might use to obscure one's fingerprints, and yet," he gestured subtly at the velvet cushion, now empty, "the velvet shows no tear, no fan was lifted and removed without force." Hastings nodded, but frowned. "But how, Poirot?" The lamps blinked only for a moment, barely long enough for the servants to navigate by memory, let alone a nimble thief. "Ah, but it is not memory. We shall rely upon, dear Hastings, is observation." Poirot beckoned to the footman, who approached with hesitant deference. "Bring the assistant, Monsieur Bertrand, and inquire of him the exact sequence of events when the lamp's light faltered." The footman scurried off and returned moments later with Mr. Bertrand, the younger of Poirot's two devoted assistants. Standing erect, Bertrand recounted in clipped tones, "Sir, I had just ignited the second lamp when there was a faint sputter, likely a pocket of air in the gas line. Both lamps dimmed, leaving the room in near darkness for perhaps 2 heartbeats. I fumbled with the valve, and once the flame caught, the lamps flared brightly. It was then that Lady Bexley's exclamation rang out." Poirot's moustaches twitched with satisfaction. 2 heartbeats so brief that only the most practiced hand could seize the fan and escape detection. Yet our culprit remains in this room. He turned to the guests, inviting their scrutiny. "Let us examine the scene more closely." One by one, the guests approached the velvet cushion. Colonel Ford knelt, his military bearing giving him confidence. Miss Sinclair crept forward, skirts rustling. Mr. Gray stood back, arms folded. Lady Bexley, flushed and trembling, gazed helplessly. Hastings stepped in, lifting the crystal decanter from the nearest table to reveal faint indentations in the rug, 2 parallel grooves where a small object had been slid away. "Look here, Poirot," he exclaimed. "Someone nudged the fan off the cushion along these tracks." Poirot knelt to inspect. There, embedded just within the fringed edge of the Persian rug, were 2 nearly invisible marks, one slightly deeper than the other, as though the fan had been angled. He traced them with a gloved finger. "Exactly so, Hastings. The fan did not vanish into the air. It was slid, perhaps into a coat or bag, by careful manual control. Note the direction of the tracks, toward the hearth, then toward the doorway." A hush fell again. All eyes turned to the doorway, where a side table held an assortment of evening wraps and cloaks. Miss Sinclair, her nerves taut, took a step forward and gasped, "My cloak, it shifted. It was folded neatly here, but now one end is splayed toward the hearth." Colonel Ford rose and rearranged the scarves, revealing beneath them a small bulge at the hem of Lady Bexley's fur-trimmed stole. "Lady Bexley," he said, gently but firmly, "would you mind removing your stole for inspection? The assistant may photograph it to avoid any damage. Lady Bexley swallowed and nodded. With wary fingers, she unfastened the clasp and handed the stole to Mr. Bertrand, under the folds of fur. Bertrand's eyes widened as he found a slender object wrapped in silk. He unwrapped it delicately, revealing the familiar mother of sticks of the imperial fan. Lady Bexley's breath caught. That is my stole. Yes, my maid brought it. Poirot raised a gloved hand, halting further commotion. Patience, s'il vous plaît. Allow me to examine the stolen lady. Bexley, perhaps you can explain how the fan came to be concealed within your wrap. Lady Bexley's composure cracked. She spoke in a hushed voice. I placed my stole here earlier, but I did not hide the fan. Her eyes glistened with tears. I swear it. I planned merely to drape my wrap and then return to the drawing room to converse with Colonel Ford. I had no interest in stealing such a priceless relic. Poirot's gaze bore into her. Tell me, Lady Bexley, was this the first time you held the fan tonight? She inhaled shakily. Yes, I admire French craftsmanship. I admired it, but only from the cushion. Then consider this. Lady Bexley is a woman of indisputable taste, but hardly of the strength to manipulate a velvet cushion so deftly in utter darkness. Poirot turned to Hastings, and yet he tapped the stole. The fan lies here, concealed within her garment. This, to me, suggests a more complex arrangement. He stood, beckoning to Miss Sinclair. Come forward, mademoiselle. You are known to be an avid follower of your father's antiquarian pursuits. Did you not examine the fan closely when it arrived? Perhaps you noted something unusual. Miss Sinclair, cheeks flushed with indignation, adjusted her posture. I did see it earlier, yes, but only as part of the display. I would never steal it, but, she hesitated, glancing at Colonel Ford. Colonel, you insisted on examining the fan's authenticity with your magnifying glass. You bent so close that I could see your breath misting on the guard sticks. Did you see anything irregular? Ford cleared his throat. I noticed a faint smudge of ink, near the hinge perhaps, from an earlier owner's annotation. He frowned. If so, it could affect provenance. But I merely noted it. I did not. Poirot placed a calming hand on Ford's shoulder. A useful observation, nevertheless. An ink stain, a clue. Look here. He produced a small magnifying loupe and inspected the silk lining of Lady Bexley's stole. There, almost invisible, were two tiny flecks of dark ink, matched by similar flecks on the rug beside the cushion. Ah, said Poirot softly. The thief moved the fan and, in doing so, dislodged particles of ink from the hinge onto the surrounding surfaces. Yet Lady Bexley's stole bears these very flecks. No one else's wrap does. Lady Bexley's eyes widened. I don't understand. How could ink from the fan get on my stole? Poirot nodded. Precisely my question. It suggests that someone wearing your stole manipulated the fan more roughly than is consistent with its elegant design. He turned to the group. Either Lady Bexley is innocent yet, her garment bears proof of contact, or someone placed the fan in her stole to frame her. A murmur rippled around the room. Hastings exchanged a glance with Sinclair, whose face was a mask of indignation. Mr. Gray, still leaning against the wall, appeared to consider the possibilities with calm detachment. Poirot's eyes shone with anticipation. We have thus far uncovered 3 facts. The fan was slid away in near darkness, along 2 tracks. It was concealed in Lady Bexley's stole, and the stole bears flecks of the fan's ink. Our suspect must be someone both capable of slight in the shadows and with access to Lady Bexley's wrap. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Hastings ventured, "But who among us would wish to disgrace Lady Bexley? Who stands to gain from her downfall?" Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. "Ah, mon ami, that is the question. We shall explore. For now, let us secure the room and interview each person individually. The true culprit resides among us, and the little grey cells shall reveal who it is." As the guests exchanged uneasy glances, Poirot's assistant Bertrand set about photographing the dust tracks and the stain flecks. Outside in the corridor, the lamps had been relit, the drawing-room door secured, and the sound of arrival guests had long since faded. Within the confines of that elegant chamber, suspicion had settled like a silent guest, and the stage was set for a psychological chess match of deception, deduction, and discovery. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects. Once the initial triage of evidence had been recorded, Hercule Poirot rose from his examination of Lady Bexley's stole and lifted his hands to still the restless crowd. "Mes amis," he announced, "it is time to assemble ourselves as a circle of inquiry. Each of you has tonight's movements to account for. Please, form a ring about me and speak truly, for in truth lies our path to justice." Captain Hastings opened the circle, ever loyal, ever steadfast, though his brow creased with concern. "Very well, Poirot," he said. "I stood near the hearth after we took our seats, observing Lady Bexley drape her stole, Colonel Ford inspecting the fan, Miss Sinclair fanning herself with an ivory card, and Mr. Gray leaning casually at the door." He paused, meeting each suspect's gaze, and then the lights flickered. In that moment, I felt a curious draught brush against my shoulder, but saw nothing more. Lady Agatha Bexley adjusted her pearls nervously. Her composure had regained some of its former grace, though suspicion hovered like a persistent shadow. "I confess," she began in a soft voice, "that when the lamp sputtered, I felt my heart quicken. I was about to step forward to touch the fan to admire its workmanship when I realized it had gone. I did not move from my position by the mantel. Her eyes flickered toward Miss Sinclair. I simply stood, frozen, like a statue shocked into stillness. Miss Violet Sinclair took a breath, smoothing the folds of her crimson sash. I was seated by the window, nursing a glass of champagne, admiring the exterior twilight. I rose to approach the fan, curious as to its artistry, and passed by Mr. Gray. He offered to step aside, though I am certain he had no reason to linger in that corner. She swallowed. "I did not handle the fan. My hands bear no ink, nor do my gloves show smudges. I seek only to restore Lady Bexley's reputation." Colonel Sebastian Ford inclined his head, silver hair gleaming beneath the lamp's renewed glow. "My involvement was purely academic. As an antiquities attaché, I felt compelled to confirm the fan's authenticity and provenance. I noted the ink stain near the hinge, which suggested a previous owner's annotation. I admit that. I held the piece for a brief moment before returning it to the cushion." His voice was calm, though his knuckles whitened as he clenched his hands. "When darkness fell, I stepped back to allow the light to be restored. I saw nothing amiss until your announcement, Poirot." Mr. Archibald Gray, at ease in bespoke evening wear, tapped the toe of his polished boot thoughtfully. "I admit. I stood by the doorway, admiring the interplay of light and shadow upon the tapestries. I overheard fragments of conversation regarding provenance and market value. It was then that I observed Hastings glance toward the mantel and Lady Bexley's face pale as the lamps dimmed. I backed away, assuming some minor misplaced object, perhaps. He gave a small, mirthless smile. I did not anticipate that the fan would vanish entirely. Poirot nodded, absorbing each account with deliberate attention. "Thank you," he said, addressing the assembled circle. "Your statements provide a framework, but there are nuances to consider." He produced a small leather notebook and transcribed notes with neat precision. Hastings felt a draft. Lady Bexley, frozen. Sinclair, moving toward fan. Ford withdrew, grey at doorway. He closed the book and continued. "Consider the shadows cast by our own bodies. In darkness, one silhouette can mask motion. A well-timed pivot could allow a hand to extend unobserved." He glanced at Colonel Ford. "You noted the stain, and returned the fan yet. It bears no sign of disturbance on its outer guard sticks. Whoever removed it knew precisely where the stain lay, and replaced the fan with minimal contact to the painted crests." A soft cough interrupted him. Poirot turned to the silent figure of Bertrand, who had re-entered with a fresh tray of tea. "And biscuits, if you please, Monsieur Bertrand. Preserve the door to the anteroom. Was it locked after the lamps were reignited?" Bertrand lifted his head. "Yes, sir. The bolt slid home. No one entered or left that door until after the fan was found in Lady Bexley's stole." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Then we are certain the perimeter remained secure. Our thief moved within this circle and moved without detection. Now, let us explore each person's motive." He waved toward Lady Bexley. "Lady, you are known for your charitable endeavors, but also for your prodigious fortune. Is it inconceivable that someone might seek to discredit you, perhaps, to unsettle your patrons or deflect attention from another matter?" She shook her head vehemently. "I cannot imagine who would wish ill upon me. My reputation is beyond reproach." Her voice faltered. "I gave no offense to any here, I believe." Poirot tapped his finger on his lips. "And you, Miss Sinclair? Family's antiquarian business thrives on exclusivity. If the fan's provenance were disproven or rumored to be false, the Sinclair collection might profit from acquiring it at reduced value. Is that not so?" Sinclair's cheeks flamed. "I would never stoop to dishonor. My father taught me to. Respect the weight of history, not to exploit it. We engage only in legitimate acquisition, as does Colonel Ford, whose reputation depends upon accurate assessments," Poirot observed, "and Mr. Gray, whose financial speculations include investing in rare artifacts." He turned to Gray. "Would you deny that a successful acquisition of such a fan at a reduced price would yield substantial profit?" Gray tipped an imaginary hat. "A business opportunity, certainly, but at what cost to one's honor? I find no delight in trickery." Poirot raised a finger. "Yet we must consider opportunity, means, and motive. One who could engineer a brief failure of light, who could work the velvet aside, slip the fan into a clasped garment, and then return the garment to its owner, exposed or framed another." He paused, scanning the circle. Mademoiselle Sinclair noted a draft. Was anything else amiss? A whispered command, a footstep behind the curtains. Sinclair closed her eyes. "I thought I heard a soft rustle, but that could have been my own breath." The music from the street filtered in, and so many voices spoke at once. Hastings cleared his throat. "Poirot, might I suggest we recreate the scene? Retrace each person's steps from their initial positions at the moment the lights went out." Poirot smiled approvingly. "An excellent proposition, Hastings." precision of reenactment often reveals the invisible. Please, all of you, return to your positions, as they were moments before the sputter. We shall observe movement and timing. As the guests relocated Lady Bexley to the mantel, Sinclair by the window, Ford near the table of scarves, Grey at the door, and Hastings by Poirot Bertrand adjusted the lamps to flicker once more. When the lights dimmed, the tableau froze. Silhouettes poised in mid-gesture. The lamps regained brilliance in under 2 seconds. Poirot steered Hastings to the hearth, indicating the parallel tracks. See here, Hastings. If Miss Sinclair had stepped forward, her foot would have followed a slightly angled path, yet her shoe prints on the rug are perfectly straight. He then moved toward the table. Lady Bexley's stole, when draped, must have returned to this exact position, yet it is slightly twisted. He beckoned Lady Bexley. Step forward and drape your stole so that it hangs naturally. She complied, and the stole fell without previous twist. That twist, Poirot pronounced, was introduced between the moment of removal and concealment. Someone manipulated your garment and replaced it to confuse us. He turned to the group. Now, who among you had the dexterity and audacity to perform such an operation in 2 heartbeats? Silence reigned. Each person looked at the others. No one met another's gaze. Poirot's gaze flickered over them, taking in the fleeting micro-expressions, a twitch of the lip, a narrowing of the eyes, a subtle tension in the shoulders. We proceed next to individual interviews, in which each of you shall expand upon your personal histories, relationships to one another, and any reasons for enmity or suspicion. He raised a gloved hand. Only through understanding the hearts beneath the finery shall we discover who among us coveted the ink-stained fan enough to steal it. As the circle dissolved into clusters for private questioning, the air remained thick with unease. The grand fan lay hidden within Lady Bexley's stole, but the true secret lay within the minds of those gathered, and Poirot was closer than ever to unveiling it. Chapter 4. Poirot takes charge with the circulation of individual interviews imminent. Hercule Poirot motioned for the door to be closed once more. The assembled guests, still clustered in uneasy groups, fell silent as he took center stage. His posture, erect and composed, radiated authority. "Mies Amos," he began, voice soft yet resolute, "we have laid the groundwork. Evidence gathered, statements heard, and the scene reenacted. Now let us explore the finer threads of motive and opportunity." He turned first to Captain Hastings. "Mon ami, I require your assistance in conducting the interviews. Please escort our suspects one by one to the adjoining library, where I shall question them in private. Ensure that each person understands the importance of candor." Hastings bowed gravely. "Of course, Poirot. Who should we begin with?" Poirot tapped his moustaches thoughtfully. "Begin with Miss Sinclair. Her knowledge of antiquities and her familial connection to the art world presents an interesting angle. Then proceed to Colonel Ford, followed by Mr. Grey, and lastly, Lady Bexley. Schedule them in that order and record their testimony diligently." Hastings swept a hand toward Miss Sinclair, who nodded nervously and stepped aside. The library door closed with a discreet click, leaving the others to confer in whispered tones. Poirot observed the remaining 3 with a keen eye. He noted Lady Bexley's trembling fingers as she clutched her evening bag, Colonel Ford's clenched jaw and measured breathing, and Mr. Grey's calm detachment, his eyes scanning the room. "Let us maintain civil decorum," Poirot murmured to the trio, "for although suspicion lies heavy, our task demands respect for one another. Inside the library, Hastings drew back a heavy curtain to let in soft lamplight. A small writing desk and two high-backed chairs faced each other beside a secretaire. Hastings gestured. "Please sit here, mademoiselle." Miss Sinclair perched on the edge of her chair, smoothing her sash. Poirot entered, carrying his leather notebook and loupe. He seated himself opposite her. "My dear, I thank you for your cooperation. I wish to ask you more about your interactions with Lady Bexley this evening. You mentioned you passed close to her as you approached the fan. Did you notice anyone else near her stole at that moment?" Sinclair hesitated. "Lady Bexley and I exchanged pleasantries earlier. I complimented her on the stole's sable trim. She laughed softly and praised my sash. But I do not recall anyone else holding the stole." Poirot nodded. "And after you passed, where did you move?" He drew a simple diagram in his notebook: a square table, a velvet cushion at one side, the collection of wraps at another. "Here is the cushion, here the cloak table, here the window. You moved along this path." Sinclair pointed. "Yes, window to cushion, past Lady Bexley, then back toward the hearth when I realized the fan was gone." "Excellent." Poirot glanced at his notes. "Were you aware, mademoiselle, that the fan's hinge bore a minute ink stain?" He produced a ledger page with a pressed fragment of vellum showing ink residue. "Have you ever handled documents or objects bearing similar stains?" Sinclair's eyes widened. "My father's collection includes annotated letters from the Napoleonic era, many bearing ink spots. I have handled such letters, but never a fan. I would have noticed ink on my gloves." "Indeed." Poirot closed his notebook. "No further questions at this time. Thank you for your candor." He rose and bowed, and Sinclair followed Hastings back toward the drawing room, looking relieved yet apprehensive. Poirot lingered, straightening a stack of embossed stationery on the desk. Hastings ushered Colonel Ford in. As Ford entered, Poirot offered him a seat. "Colonel, you handle relics with expert care. I would like to know more about the nature of the ink stain you observed. Was it fresh or old and encrusted?" Ford leaned forward. The stain appeared aged dark brown, not glossy, as though decades old. It lay at the inner hinge where the sticks meet the leaf. One might only notice it under magnification. "Precisely." Poirot tapped his loupe. "Did you sorry to press notice whether the hinge mechanism was loose, perhaps allowing ink to flake more readily onto hands or surfaces?" Ford rubbed his chin. "Now that you mention it, the hinge was slightly stiff, as though altered or restored. But I assumed it was original wear." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Stiff, yet intact. And you replaced the fan directly on the cushion?" "Yes, straight on. I saw no point in tilting it." Ford exhaled slowly. "Yet I recall dust settling on my gloves. When I returned it dust, I brushed off at once. Very good." Poirot paused, observing Ford's posture. "One more question. When you stepped away, did you see anyone else examining the fan or touching that cushion?" Ford frowned. "Barely, only a glimpse of Mr. Gray shifting near the door. But then the lights faded, and for a heartbeat, all was indistinct. Mercy, Colonel, you may go." Ford rose, donned his stoic mask, and left with Hastings. Poirot cleared his throat as the library door closed. He turned back to the desk and re-examined his diagram. The dust tracks, the flecks of ink, the displaced stolor danced in his mind. He murmured, "Little grey cells, engage." Mr. Gray entered next, his expression calm. He declined to sit, instead leaning against the desk. I trust your questions will be swift, Monsieur Poirot. Hardly, sir, but necessary. Poirot gestured to a chair, and Gray finally seated himself. Mr. Gray, you have a reputation as a man of finance. Discretion is your currency. Tell me, have you ever speculated on the arts? Gray's lips twitched. Certainly, art markets yield strong returns when one has the means. Indeed, Poirot arched an eyebrow. Would you consider acquiring the fan if it became available at a depressed market price, say if its authenticity were questioned after the ink stain was publicized? Gray's eyes flickered. In theory, a savvy investor might, but in practice, I prefer acquisitions beyond reproach. Yet you would profit, Poirot pressed. Profit does not always require moral compromise. Gray sat back, studying Poirot. You presume much, detective. Poirot smiled. Perhaps. But consider this. After the lamps failed, you moved closer to the door, nearer to the cloak table. You could have slipped the fan into a pocket. Yes. Gray inhaled. But I did not. I admired the lamp's restoration, acknowledged Hastings, and offered to fetch tea. Very well. Poirot tapped his notebook. Thank you, Mr. Gray. He rose as Gray did, and the banker exited under Hastings's escort. Finally, Lady Bexley was ushered in, her composure regained, though shadows lingered beneath her eyes. She seated herself and smoothed her gown. Poirot offered a cup of tea. Lady Bexley, I apologize for the distress this inquiry causes you. But I must ask, do you recall anyone offering to assist you with your stole earlier this evening? Lady Bexley's gaze flickered. My maid, Helena, helped me fasten it. She withdrew when Colonel Ford approached. She sipped the tea. I saw Helena glance at me curiously, but she said nothing. Did you place anything else within your stole papers? Cards, notes? She looked surprised. Nothing. My evening bag contained only a Sanchosa handkerchief and a calling card. Case? Poirot nodded. Then the fan's placement within your garment remains mysterious. Either you were not the only one handling your stole, or you were misled. Her voice trembled. I feel betrayed, but I have no explanation. Poirot stood and closed his notebook. Very well, Lady Bexley. You may return. He accompanied her to the drawing room, where she rejoined the others, face resolute yet wary. As the final interview concluded, Poirot stepped to the centre of the library, lifting both hands. Hastings closed the door behind him. Mon ami, Poirot said quietly, we have heard each account. We know the mechanics of the theft and the sequence of events. The evidence suggests skill, planning, and knowledge of the fan's inked hinge. But motive eludes us. Hastings rubbed his chin. Could the culprit be among the servants? Helena Bertrand, the footman? Poirot shook his head. No, the bolt on the anteroom door remained secure. Our suspect is one of the 5 in that drawing room. Soon we shall reconvene and compare our findings. He paused, eyes glinting. For now, Hastings, see that no one leaves the premises, and send Helena. To me there is one more perspective to consider. Hastings bowed and left, and Poirot returned to his chair, fingers steepled. The little grey cells were already at work, weaving observations into theories, preparing for the confrontation to come. Chapter 5. The first false lead. The library door opened once more, and a slight figure entered. Helena, Lady Bexley's maid. Her expression was anxious, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a lifelong servant. Poirot gestured to a chair beside the desk. Mademoiselle Helena, I thank you for coming. Pray, sit. Helena lowered herself into the seat, smoothing the folds of her simple uniform skirt. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot, I am at your service." "Madame's tour," Poirot began gently, "was fastened by you this evening. You placed it upon her shoulders and then laid it beside the cloak table. Is that correct?" Helena nodded. "Yes, monsieur. I helped Lady Bexley into the stole and then placed it at the edge of the table, just as her ladyship had asked. I left to attend to the other guests, and when I returned, the lamps were relit and the stole remained there." "And you saw no one else touch the stole?" Poirot's voice was softly urgent. "No one, monsieur. I was across the room fetching fresh coasters for the decanters. I glanced at the group, but I did not see anyone near the scarves or mufflers." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Thank you, mademoiselle. One more question. Did you notice any unusual conversation or tension among the guests before the lights failed?" Helena hesitated, her brows knitting. "Well, Lady Bexley spoke with Mr. Gray about financial matters, something about market fluctuations. Then Miss Sinclair and Colonel Ford exchanged words about the value of provenance. Miss Sinclair seemed displeased with Colonel Ford's opinion." "Interesting." Poirot made a note. "And did you overhear their words?" Helena blushed. "Only fragments, monsieur. Colonel Ford said, 'A relic is only as good as the story that backs it.' And Miss Sinclair replied sharply, 'Your story cannot override fact.' That was before the lamps dimmed." Poirot bowed his head. "Merci, you may go." Helena rose and slipped from the room with a respectful nod. As the door clicked shut, Poirot stood and surveyed his notes. "Hastings," he said, "we have a faint tension between Sinclair and Ford, but these are high-minded disagreements, common among connoisseurs. Yet the timing suggests someone used that exchange to distract others." Hastings frowned. "Poirot, might it be that Colonel Ford's grip on the fan loosened the hinge, causing those flecks of ink to scatter? That could implicate him especially. If he hurried the replacement, perhaps," Poirot acknowledged, "but the deliberate concealment in Lady Bexley's stole suggests a framing. We must now examine other evidence, specifically the call card case found in Mr. Gray's pocket." Hastings's eyes widened. "I thought that card case belonged to Lady Bexley." "Exactly." Poirot moved to the desk and opened Gray's leather card case, which Bertrand had delivered. Inside lay a single calling card, Lady Bexley's, elegantly scripted. Yet beneath the top card, another had been crumpled and discarded, a card bearing Mr. Archibald Gray's own name. Poirot held the crumpled card in tweezers. "See here, 2 cards, one folded and hidden beneath the other." A subtle attempt to remove any suspicion that the card case was misplaced. But why carry Lady Bexley's card at all? He examined the folds, and note the crease, made swiftly, perhaps to conceal evidence. Someone pocketed this card case after rifling through the scarves, then hastily reinserted Lady Bexley's card to cover their tracks. Hastings's face paled. So Mr. Gray was near the scarves, consistent with the dust track sand he had access to Lady Bexley's stole. "Precisely." Poirot tapped the card. "This is our first false lead. If we accuse Mr. Gray now, we are likely mistaken. The framing is too clever. Yet the card case and the dust tracks point to him." He paused, considering. "Let us reconstruct. When the lamps flickered, someone near the cloak table, perhaps Mr. Gray, slid the fan along the dust-laden rug, concealed it in Lady Bexley's stole, then replaced the stole so neatly that even her maid did not notice. He then pocketed the card case to justify his presence by the scarves and returned it, discarding his own card. This supplies him an alibi. He was merely retrieving cards. Hastings ran a hand through his hair, but Mr. Gray's calm demeanour suggests innocence or a well-rehearsed guilt. Either is possible. Poirot closed his notebook. We must test this theory. Hastings, fetch Mr. Gray and Lady Bexley. They shall remain in the drawing-room, he added quietly, and prepare Miss Sinclair and Colonel Ford for a second reenactment. Shifting the lamps to fail once more, this time with controlled distraction, Hastings bowed and departed. Poirot took a moment to collect his thoughts. Pacing before the fireplace, the little grey cells deliberated. The first false lead was too neat, too calculated. The suspect must be someone literate in both high society, rituals and covert deceptions, someone with motive to frame Mr. Gray. When Hastings returned with Mr. Gray and Lady Bexley, Poirot spoke crisply. Gentlemen, ladies, we shall recreate the moment of darkness a second time. This time, Colonel Ford and Miss Sinclair will position themselves near the cloak table to observe any misdirection. Mr. Gray, you will remain at the doorway. Lady Bexley, by the mantel. As the positions were assumed, Bertrand dimmed the lights once more. The room plunged into near blackness, breath held in unison. In that instant, a soft, shuffler-light footstep from the hearth toward the cloak table. Then silence. The lamps flared back to life. Poirot pointed a finger at Colonel Ford. Colonel, your foot bears a faint dust mark on the solon. Improper angle for someone standing by the hearth, and your cuff shows flecks of ink. Ford glanced down, confusion mingling with annoyance. I brushed against the table to steady myself when the light failed. Poirot nodded slowly. Indeed. And the angle of your foot corresponds exactly with the track from the hearth to the scarves. Lady Bexley gasped. Colonel, you accuse him. Poirot's gaze remained steady. Not yet, madame. We now have suspicions about two suspects. Mr. Gray and Colonel Ford each had motive, means, and opportunity. Yet the truth lies deeper. He turned to Hastings. Mon ami, fetch our guests. They must see this demonstration. As the others reinterred, Poirot addressed them. We have conducted 2 reenactments. The first suggested Mr. Gray's involvement. The second points to Colonel Ford. Both are plausible, but the thief is neither. The clever framing implicates two men of taste and reputation. Our true culprit is hiding in plain sight someone whose motive has escaped our notice. He paused, eyes sweeping the group. We shall proceed now to examine personal correspondence found in the library. A letter, torn and stained with ink, discovered under the hearth rug. This letter may illuminate hidden motives and lead us away from these false leads. With that, Poirot gestured for Bertrand to produce the letter. As the torn paper fluttered into view, the assembled party leaned forward, curiosity and dread mingling in their expressions. The mystery deepened and the first false lead dissolved into the shadows of suspicion, leaving only the promise of a more intricate deception yet to be revealed. Chapter 6. Initial interviews begin. The torn letter lay unfolded on the library's writing desk, its ragged edges and ink-stained corners testifying to a desperate haste. Hercule Poirot leaned over it, his brow furrowed as he deciphered the elegant, looping script. The few legible lines read, "If you do not retrieve the fan by midnight, all shall be revealed. Remember our agreement, no betrayal, or the world will know what happened at Chateau des Fontaines." Poirot tapped the desk with a slender finger. "Ah, Hastings, observe this. A clandestine pact inked in fear. The writer warns of betrayal and refers to an incident at Château de Fontaine. We must discover who among our company has ties to that estate. Hastings peered at the letter. I've never heard of Château de Fontaine in our circle. Could it relate to one of the guests' backgrounds? Precisely, Poirot agreed. And we shall begin by questioning each in turn about any knowledge of that chateau and any prior dealings with Empress Eugenie's memorabilia. He called in Miss Sinclair first, and the library door closed behind her. Poirot offered her a seat as Hastings stood discreetly by the desk. Miss Sinclair, Poirot began, do you know of Château de Fontaine? Sinclair's expression tightened. I have heard my father mention a chateau of that name in relation to a private auction in Paris several years ago. He wished to acquire certain Napoleonic relics from there, but the sale fell through. Interesting, Poirot murmured. And did you ever visit the chateau or its former owner? She hesitated. No, monsieur. I commissioned research for the auction catalogue, but never travelled. I believe the chateau's sale was cancelled after a scandal something about a misplaced fan, though I thought that a rumour. Poirot's moustaches twitched. A fan? Curious. You noted that controversy but dismissed it. Sinclair nodded, cheeks flushed. Yes, I assumed it was a whispered exaggeration. Tersbeen. And regarding the letter, Poirot continued, was its handwriting familiar to you? Sinclair leaned forward. I have seen similar penmanship in my father's correspondence, especially in his letters to a Parisian dealer, Monsieur Duval. He often complained of counterparties reneging on deals. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A name Duval. Make a note, Hastings. He closed his notebook. Thank you, mademoiselle. You may go. Sinclair left, uncertainty lingering in her gaze. Hastings guided Colonel Ford into the library next. Colonel. Poirot greeted. This letter mentions Château de Fontaine and a prior agreement involving the fan. Have you any knowledge of such a place or this past scandal? Ford adjusted his tie. I was stationed in Paris around that time. I recall a social set that included certain exiled nobility and antique collectors. I heard whispers of a Fontaine affair, a missing artifact dispute that sulked across society pages. Did it involve a fan? Poirot pressed. Ford frowned. Perhaps. The reports were vague, citing a stolen heirloom. No names were given. The matter was hushed. Poirot tapped his notebook. And did you know Monsieur Duval, this dealer in Paris? Ford's eyes widened. Duval? Yes, he tried to recruit me to authenticate certain military artifacts. He was a charismatic fellow, but untrustworthy. I refused his overtures. Excellent, Poirot said, folding the letter. Thank you, Colonel. You may return. Ford left, shoulders tight with lingering irritation. Next, Hastings ushered in Mr. Gray, who seated himself with measured calm. Mr. Gray, Poirot began, this letter implies a threat. Retrieve the fan or face exposure of a prior betrayal. Have you any connection to Château de Fontaine or dealings with Duval? Gray stroked his chin. I once financed a minor renovation of a Parisian chateau for an acquaintance, certain Viscount des Moulins. I believe he owned Château de Fontaine before selling it at auction. Poirot's brow arched. So you had a financial stake in the chateau's holdings? Gray nodded, a modest one. My involvement ended when I sold my shares. I never met Duval personally, though the Viscount spoke of Duval's interest in the chateau's artifacts. Poirot tapped the letter again. Would you have motive? To reclaim the fan, now perhaps to protect your investments, reputation, or to preempt scandal. Gray's lips curved into a faint smile. My investments seldom rest on a single relic, but reputational damage can have wider consequences, indeed. Poirot closed his notebook. Thank you, that is all. Gray departed under Hastings's vigilant watch. Finally, Lady Bexley entered, her posture composed yet wary. Poirot offered her a seat and resumed his place at the desk. Lady Bexley. He addressed her softly. This letter suggests a shared secret regarding Chateau des Fontaines. Have you any knowledge of such? Lady Bexley's eyes darted to the floor. Monsieur Poirot, I attended a charitable fundraiser at Fontaine years ago. A private collection was exhibited among it. A delicate fan once owned by Empress Eugenie. It was said to bear her personal annotations, perhaps the ink stain on ours. Poirot leaned forward. Annotations, perhaps written in that chateau's library. Was there any controversy? She swallowed. Rumors swirled that the exposed private matters of the Empress letters that should have remained private. The exhibition was abruptly closed, and certain items reclaimed by a silent consignment. Were you involved in reclaiming any items? Poirot asked, voice gentle. Lady Bexley's lips trembled. Only as a patron. I contributed funds to preserve the pieces, but I did not handle them myself. Very good. Poirot closed the folder and rose. Thank you, Lady Bexley. Your recollections are invaluable. He escorted her from the library, pausing to glance back at Hastings as the final door closed. Poirot allowed himself a moment to collect his thoughts. Hastings, he murmured. Our suspects all have ties to Chateau des Fontaines. Sinclair through scholarship, Ford through acquaintance, Gray through finance, and Bexley through patronage. The letter frames an obligation among them. Yet only one had motives strong enough to steal and hide the fan to satisfy an ultimatum under threat. Hastings frowned. Do you think someone was part of that original scandal and now seeks to correct it? Or to profit from it? Poirot replied. The fan's ink stain was the trigger. Exposure of that stain could reignite the scandal. Someone here must retrieve the fan to protect themselves. He paced to the window, eyes distant. We must now compare handwriting samples, Duval's correspondence, and our letter, to see if the warning came from one of them. But above all, we must question the loyalty among these four and their relationships to one another. Hastings nodded. Shall we reconvene with our suspects? Poirot turned, moustaches bristling with anticipation. Yes, let us gather them in the drawing-room once more. There, I shall reveal a subtle but crucial detail that will guide us toward the true culprit and away from the tangled web of past allegiances, and with that, the first true investigative net was cast, drawing all suspects into the fragile mesh of Poirot's deductions, where one misstep would betray the heart of the mystery. Chapter 7. The psychological game. Hush fell over the drawing-room as Hercule Poirot entered, his fingers lightly clasped behind his back. The fan, now safely returned to its velvet cushion beneath the glass case, gleamed innocently in the lamplight. Yet the true drama lay not in the relic itself, but in the tempest that churned within the hearts of those gathered. Mise Amos. Poirot began, voice calm and measured. We have considered physical evidence, reenacted movements, and reviewed past correspondences. But there remains another realm, one of psychology, in which the mind reveals truths the tongue conceals. Tonight we explore that realm. He motioned to 4 chairs arranged in a semicircle before him. Please be seated." Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, and Mr. Grey complied, each selecting a chair as though it were a throne. Bexley with graceful hesitation, Sinclair with determined poise, Ford with military precision, and Grey with languid indifference. Poirot stood. Before them, the very picture of dignity. "I propose a little exercise," he announced. "I shall ask each of you a question designed to provoke reflection and, perhaps, a reveal of hidden emotion. Answer truthfully and without consultation." He fixed his gaze on Lady Bexley first. "Lady Bexley," Poirot said, "imagine. You have lost something of great value, something irreplaceable. Would you feel relief if you knew it had been returned to someone who truly understood its worth, even if that someone were not the original owner?" Lady Bexley's hands clasped the edges of her chair. She inhaled slowly. "Relief, yes, Monsieur Poirot. Relief that the object is safe, but pain that it is not mine. The loss of ownership wounds one's pride as much as one's heart." "Perceptive answer," Poirot replied, inclining his head. "And yet, some might feel gratitude rather than grief." He turned to Sinclair. "Miss Sinclair, what would you feel in that circumstance?" Sinclair's brow furrowed. "Anger, monsieur. If I discovered that another possessed what was rightfully mine, especially something tied to my family's reputation, I would feel indignant and seek restitution." She tapped her foot lightly. "I would not rest until the matter was corrected." "Good," Poirot murmured. "We now turn to Colonel Ford." He leaned forward, voice gentle. "Colonel, suppose you learned of a past transgressions, someone you trusted had betrayed you, but years later you found the means to extract recompense. Would you consider revenge justifiable?" Ford's knuckles whitened as he gripped his cane. "Revenge is a precarious path, monsieur. Justice, yes, but revenge seldom restores the original wrong. One might pursue restitution, but revenge tends only to perpetuate pain." "Admirable restraint." Poirot smiled faintly. "Finally, Mr. Grey." He addressed the banker in soft tones. "If you held a secret power over another information that could ruin reputations, would you use it to secure your own advantage? Or would you remain silent to preserve civility?" Grey leaned back, studying Poirot. He paused before answering. "Power is not given for charity. If knowledge of another's past could safeguard my interests, I would use it discreetly. But I would strive to avoid collateral harm." He lifted a finger. "Discretion, monsieur, is paramount." Poirot nodded. "Mercy," he straightened, stepping back to survey the reactions. Bexley exhaled shakily. Sinclair's jaw was set. Ford's expression was contemplative, and Grey's eyes gleamed with controlled ambition. "Now," Poirot continued, "observe one another." He clapped softly. "Notice how the mind's corners light or shadow as you hear another's truth." He directed his next query to the room at large. "Who among you feels more justified? In their stance the protector of legacy, the crusader for restitution, the seeker of justice, or the dispenser of discreet power?" He let the question hang. A tense silence followed. Sinclair glanced at Bexley, whose eyes flickered with anguish. Ford's foot tapped once. Grey's lips curved thoughtfully. At length, Miss Sinclair spoke. "I do not seek restitution, only preservation, but if preservation requires confrontation, then I would act." Her voice was crisp. Lady Bexley leaned forward. "I would protect beauty and history above all land. Forgive any who returned it honestly." Her gaze settled on Mr. Gray and you, sir, would leverage secrets for gain. Even if it harmed innocence. Gray's expression hardened. Innocence is a relative term, madame. Those who meddle in matters they barely comprehend are not wholly innocent. A murmur travelled around the circle. Colonel Ford cleared his throat. Discretion and justice need not be mutually exclusive. He turned to Sinclair. Your conviction is commendable, but firmness can become obsession. Poirot raised a gloved hand to still them. Very good. Now consider this final scenario. The clock strikes midnight. The ultimatum has passed, and the fan remains missing. Would you volunteer to reveal the secret of Chateau de Fontaine, thereby exposing past misdeeds to secure its return, even at the cost of public scandal? Sinclair's cheeks paled. Public scandal would tarnish my father's name. No, I would seek a private solution. She clasped her hands. Lady Bexley shook her head. I would pay any price to preserve the fan's honour, and if scandal must follow, then so be it. Ford's gaze was steady. I would negotiate, never expose more than necessary. He touched his metal ribbon. My reputation demands discretion. Gray inclined his head. Negotiation, yes, but leverage must be maintained. Sacrifice only what cannot harm me. Poirot's eyes glittered. Thank you, Miss Amos. You have revealed much. He paused, letting his words sink in. Observe how Lady Bexley would sacrifice her reputation, while Miss Sinclair would avoid scandal at all costs. Colonel Ford mediates, and Mr. Gray retains leverage. Each stance corresponds with a potential motive. He advanced to the glass case containing the fan. Consider now the ultimatum. Retrieve the fan by midnight or face exposure. Which of you had the greatest incentive to act swiftly and alone without consultation to protect yourselves? He turned, gaze sweeping them. The man who valued leverage above all might seize the fan to keep secrets buried. The woman who valued preservation above reputation might risk scandal for the object's safety. Yet only one among you had both. The psychological fortitude and the opportunity to conceal the fan in another's garment. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the hearth. Hastings, watching Poirot, noted the suspect's tension. Sinclair's clasped fists, Bexley's trembling lips, Ford's taut shoulders, and Gray's cool composure. All was strained by the psychological game. Poirot cleared his throat. We have much to consider. Tomorrow we shall resume investigation with fresh eyes. For tonight, let us retire with the knowledge that the game has begun, and the greatest reveal lies not in physical evidence, but in the hearts we have glimpsed. With that, Poirot dismissed the gathering, each suspect departing with a piece of their psyche left exposed. The drawing-room fell into contemplative quiet, the fan's silent presence a reminder that the most delicate artifacts are often the ones hidden within the human mind. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery late into the evening, when the guests had departed, and the servant staff tucked away the last of the clean cups. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the drawing-room, the fire's embers casting flickering shadows across the walls. He contemplated the psychological profiles he had observed, the preservationist, the mediator, the strategist, and the pragmatist, the intricate web of motives that bound them all. Yet something niggled at him, the absence of any fresh clues since the torn letter. His little grey cells urged him onward. A sudden knock at the door drew his attention. It was Captain Hastings, ushering in Bertrand with a concerned expression. In Bertrand's hand was a small, heavy boxan, exquisitely carved wooden casket. its brass hinges gleaming. "Monsieur Poirot," Bertrand began, "this arrived just a few moments ago in an unmarked parcel. The delivery man insisted it be placed in your care immediately. There was no name on the label." Poirot rose, courteously accepting the casket. He examined its exterior, polished walnut, inlaid with ebony fretwork, and sealed with a simple crimson wax seal bearing the faint impression of an unfamiliar crest, 2 crossed quills beneath a fleur-de-lis. Intrigued, he sliced the seal with a letter opener and lifted the lid. Inside lay a single object, an ornate letter opener fashioned from mother of pearl and silver, its handle in the shape of an open fan. The blade was engraved with delicate flourishes, and along its spine a smear of dark ink matched precisely the stain on the imperial fan's hinge. Beneath it, folded neatly, was a note: "To the seeker of truth, this blade belonged to Empress Eugenie's private desk. It bears the same ink that stained the fan. Use it wisely, and you shall see the hand that stained both." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, mon Dieu, a secondary mystery indeed, a poisoned gift that both distracts and informs." He turned to Hastings. "My friend, we have been summoned not only by the fan's disappearance, but now by this ominous token. It suggests a connection between the fan's ink stain and another artifact from the same provenance." Hastings peered into the casket. A letter opener, shaped like the fan delicately carved. "But what is the purpose of sending this now?" "To unsettle us," surely, Poirot mused, "and to point our attention to the ink. The note implies the same ink stained both objects, yet the letter opener was never part of tonight's display. Its presence here suggests that someone possesses intimate knowledge of the Empress's private collection." He replaced the opener and note into the casket and closed the lid. "Hastings, summon our 4 suspects. We must gauge their reactions to this delivery and, perhaps, trap the culprit in a fresh misstep." Moments later, Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, and Mr. Gray returned to the drawing-room, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and unease. Poirot placed the casket upon the mantel and addressed them. "Mies, Amos, a new item has arrived for our attention. Not the fan itself, but an object connected by the same ink, an Empress's letter opener. Its arrival raises questions about provenance, access, and motive." He opened the casket, allowing the others to see the blade. "Behold," Lady Bexley gasped softly, "I have never seen such a piece." Sinclair leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Neither have I, but the ink, it must be the same batch used during the Empress's time." Ford removed his spectacles for a closer look. "The craftsmanship is consistent with mid-19th century French court artisans." Gray remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the letter opener and the note. "It implies that someone among us holds secrets beyond tonight's affair." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. Now, I invite each of you to explain how this letter opener might have come into your possession. If at all, and if you had any knowledge of its existence prior to this moment." He turned to Lady Bexley. "Madame, as patron of historical preservation, have you ever encountered this object?" Lady Bexley shook her head. "I contributed to preserving certain chateaux, libraries including that of Chateau de Fontaine, but I handled only documents and vault keys. I do not recall ever seeing this opener." Poirot made a note. "Very well." He then faced Sinclair. "Mademoiselle, did your father's research into Napoleonic relics include this piece?" Sinclair hesitated. He mentioned a set of desks, accessories, but he focused on manuscripts. "I do not believe the opener was catalogued." "And you, Colonel, Poirot asked Ford. During your time in Paris, did you encounter or authenticate such accessories? Ford's jaw tightened. I examined military documents, not writing implements. I cannot recall this piece. Poirot's eyes then settled on Mr. Gray. And you, sir, as financier of Chateau de Fontaine renovations, did you ever see this? Letter opener or its crest-to-crossed quills beneath a flawless. Gray's composure faltered for the first time, a fleeting tightening of his eyes. He cleared his throat. I financed structural work, not interior restoration. I left those details to the curators and artisans. His voice was calm, yet his fingers flexed. Poirot leaned forward. Interesting. None of you claims direct acquaintance with this object. Yet whoever sent it knew precisely its design, its provenance, and the connection of its ink to the fan. He paused, observing their reactions carefully. Lady Bexley's hand fluttered over her heart. Sinclair's gaze darted between the letter opener and Gray. Ford's lips pressed thin, and Gray's posture stiffened. Poirot tapped his fingertip on the casket's lid. This is our secondary mystery. The identity of the sender, the purpose of the gift, and most importantly, their access to both fan and opener. The darkest ink binds these artifacts and the person who wielded them. He stepped back. Monsieur, Bertrand will collect the letter opener under secure conditions. But before he does, I wish to hear one final account. Each of you shall tell the group how you spent the hour, between the letter's arrival in the library and your return to this room, particularly your interactions with the servants and any private conversations you held. A hush settled over the room. Poirot's gaze flicked from one suspect to the next, each now aware that their every detail might reveal the secret hand behind both mysteries. The game had shifted. It was no longer solely about the vanished fan, but about the silent menace lurking in ink and silverer. Menace that threatened to expose a hidden crime and the clandestine history of Chateau de Fontaine. Chapter 9. Hidden. Connections. Hercule Poirot stood at the threshold of the drawing-room, watching the four suspects arrange themselves in semi-darkness around the hearth, their silhouettes wavering in the firelight. The casket containing the letter opener had been secured by Bertrand, and attention now turned to their accounts of the hour between the delivery of the torn letter and their reassembly here. Poirot raised a hand for silence. Mes amis, he began. We must examine your movements and interactions during that critical hour. Tell us plainly, where were you, with whom did you speak, and what did you observe? Lady Bexley, her expression still guarded, spoke first. After I left the library, I returned to the cloak table to fetch my stolenly, to discover it folded neatly where I had placed it. I paused to steady my nerves, and then approached Colonel Ford, who stood by the piano. We exchanged a few words regarding Lady Sinclair's earlier criticism of provenance. She turned toward Sinclair. Colonel Ford suggested that you were too quick to dismiss historical context in favor of aesthetic appeal, Miss Sinclair. Sinclair's eyes flashed. He implied I lacked sufficient expertise. I recall responding that true scholarship must respect both form and origin. She glanced at Ford. Your words felt like a slight to my father's work. Colonel Ford nodded, lips pressed thin. A spirited debate, mademoiselle, nothing more. He raised a hand to halt Sinclair's retort. Afterwards, I stepped toward Mr. Gray to inquire about his impressions of the renovation funding. He seemed preoccupied. Mr. Gray cleared his throat. Indeed. Colonel, you asked whether the funds allocated for Chateau de Fontaine's restoration arrived on schedule. I confirmed that our financial transfer had been delayed by internal auditing. I then excused myself to take a private call in the vestibule. He pointed toward the door. I spoke for several minutes with an associate, one, Mr. Duval, I believe. Silence fell. Hastings shifted. Mr. Duval, the dealer Mademoiselle Sinclair mentioned. Poirot nodded. Please continue, Mr. Gray. Gray inclined his head. After the call, I returned to the drawing room, contemplating the sum that might be lost if scandal erupted. At that moment, I saw Miss Sinclair approach Lady Bexley, offering comfort for her ordeal. I lingered at the doorway before learning of the letter opener's delivery. Poirot turned to Sinclair. Mademoiselle, did you indeed approach Lady Bexley? Sinclair hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I wished to apologize for our debate and assure her that any disagreement was scholarly, not personal. I then saw Mr. Gray pause before the vestibule. His expression was thoughtful, almost troubled. Lady Bexley drew in a breath. I recall both of you near me. Colonel Ford observed us from the piano, and Mr. Gray stood at the door. She glanced at Ford. Colonel, you left shortly after Miss Sinclair approached. Ford's jaw tightened. I wanted to verify the ledger in the Manners study regarding the donations list. I thought it connected to the delayed funds Mr. Gray mentioned. He turned to Hastings. I visited the study only a moment to confirm the entry. Then, I returned here upon hearing the commotion. Hastings frowned. Yet the study door was locked until after the fan was found. He exchanged a look with Poirot, who nodded. Precisely. Now, Lady Bexley, you said you paused near the piano. Did you speak with anyone else there? She closed her eyes. No, only Colonel Ford. Then Miss Sinclair approached. She opened them and glanced at Gray. I thought I saw you whispering into your coat, sir. Gray's lips curved. My call, as I said, nothing more. Poirot tapped his fingertip on the mantel. Thus far, we have a web of interactions. Bexley and Sinclair, Ford and Gray, Gray and Duval by phone. But there is another connection, one not yet spoken. He turned to Sinclair. Mademoiselle, you mentioned your father's research, which was funded by Lady Bexley's patronage. Is that correct? Sinclair nodded. Yes, Lady Bexley generously underwrote my father's catalogue of the Napoleonic collection. She looked at Bexley. Without her contribution, my work on Château des Fontaines would never have been published. Bexley inclined her head. I believed in your scholarship. She paused. But I only funded manuscripts, not physical artifacts. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And yet Mr. Gray's financing of the chateau's structural restoration benefited those very artifacts, including the fan and the letter opener. He glanced at Gray. Your investments secured the safety of the building, but not necessarily the catalogued items. Gray's expression remained unreadable. The artifacts remained the property of the Viscount, not of the chateau itself. He folded his arms. Had the scandal reached public ears, I risked both reputation and financial loss. Poirot circled the group. Let us summarize these hidden connections. Sinclair owes her academic reputation to Bexley. Bexley's social standing is bolstered by Sinclair's scholarly work. Ford's military background was leveraged by Gray's financial network to gain introductions to high society, and Gray's investments relied on Ford's endorsements. Each relies on another for mutual benefit. A murmur swept through the room. Hastings whispered, "A tangled web, indeed." Poirot nodded. Mutual benefit can breed hidden resentments. A scholar may chafe under the patron's oversight. A patron may feel overshadowed by scholarly acclaim. A financier may resent the mediating role of a military attaché, and a colonel may envy the banker's entree to aristocratic circles. Silence reigned as each person considered the mutual dependencies. Finally, Sinclair spoke, voice low, so any of us could feel gratitude, but also entitlement. One slight or missed courtesy could fester into secret resentment. Bexley's eyes glistened. I never intended to patronize, only to preserve history. Yet I admit I felt betrayed when Colonel Ford questioned my judgment publicly. Ford nodded, and I felt overlooked when Mr. Gray bypassed my recommendations to the Viscount. He went directly to Parisian financiers. Gray's gaze flicked to Ford. Your reports were helpful, but not decisive. I had to secure the funds swiftly. Poirot raised a gloved hand to still them. Mon Dieu, here lies true motive. When intertwined interests clash, a single grievance can spark betrayal. The fan's disappearance, the framing in stole, even the letter openers threatening no toll. These are facets of a personal vendetta, masked as coincidence. He turned to Hastings. My friend, record these connections. Tomorrow, we shall follow the trail to its source, the missing link, Monsieur Duval, whose name appears on both torn letter and Gray's call. He holds the key to unraveling this web. Poirot stepped back, letting the suspects absorb the revelation that their fates were bound together by ambition, loyalty, and envy. The hidden connections he had exposed now formed a lattice of motive, one of which concealed the truth behind the ink-stained fan and the ghostly blade. Alike, Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue in the subdued glow of the drawing-room's lamps. Hercule Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, summoning the little grey cells to work in perfect harmony. The evening's revelations, hidden alliances, whispered resentments, and the ominous note from Monsieur Duval had woven a complex tapestry of motive. Yet Poirot sensed that one final, overlooked detail would unlock the mystery completely. He opened his eyes and addressed the gathered suspects. Mies, Amos, we have explored your past dealings and your intricate relationships. We have considered the torn letter and the threatening gift. Now, I wish to share with you a secret clue so subtle that it escaped even my initial scrutiny. He moved gracefully to the mantel, where the fan lay encased in glass. With a practiced hand, he lifted the case's lid just enough to remove the fan on its velvet cushion. He held it at arm's length, turning it slowly so every angle caught the lamplight. The assembled guests watched in silent anticipation. Observe, Herr Poirot murmured, pointing to the fan's guardsticks. We have noted the ink stain at the hinge, and we've agreed on its provenance. But look also at this, a tiny, larger than the head of a pin on the inner edge of the third stick from the left. He lowered the fan to eye level, guiding the group's gaze. This abrasion is consistent with repeated contact against a hard, narrow surface, specifically the rim of a letter opener blade as it is sheathed and unsheathed. Consider its placement when the fan is folded and slipped into the scabbard of an opener. The third stick would rub against the metal edge, wearing away its polish in this precise spot. Captain Hastings leaned forward, so the fan was stored with the opener at some point, explaining how the ink transferred and how someone knew of the opener's existence. Exactement. Poirot smiled. The culprit not only stole the fan but also had access to the letter opener, blade-shaped to mimic the fan itself. Only someone who possessed both items could cause such wear, and only someone with the requisite familiarity would notice and exploit this fit. He turned to the suspects. Miss Sinclair, Lady Bexley, Colonel Ford, Mr. Graythink, carefully. Who among you had both the opportunity to bring a letter opener into this house tonight, and to handle the fan repeatedly enough to produce this abrasion? Lady Bexley's lips parted, but she said nothing. Sinclair's eyes widened. Ford tapped his cane nervously. Gray's posture remained composed, but his gaze flickered toward the hearth. Poirot replaced the fan and sealed the case. He then retrieved the wooden casket containing the letter opener from Bertrand. With deliberate calm, he opened it and withdrew the blade, holding it beside the fan's guard sticks. He aligned the two. See how the blade's spine matches the curvature of the fan sticks, and how the metal lip would abrade that precise spot with each insertion. He gestured to the small chip on the opener's handle. And note this, a chip on the underside of the blade's scabbard, the matching chip, indicating the fan was housed within it. He paused to let their astonishment settle. The matching abrasion and chip confirmed that the fan and the opener have been paired numerous times, likely in the hours before tonight's gathering. Whoever did this brought both objects together to test their fit, before using the fan as a shield of blackmail and concealment. Hastings exhaled. Poirot, that is brilliant. But who had such motive and means? Poirot's eyes blazed. Monsieur Duval, the Parisian dealer, knows the objects, but he could not have delivered the opener in person. The note bore his name, yet the delivery was untraceable. He required an agent within this house, someone with trusted access. The one person whose role permits movement among personal effects, and yet who escaped our earlier scrutiny, is Helena. Lady Bexley's maid. A collective gasp swept the room. Sinclair put a hand to her mouth. Ford's jaw dropped. Gray's composure cracked for the barest moment. Lady Bexley looked at Helena, who stood in the shadows by the door, blanching. Helena, her ladyship whispered. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, Helena had the perfect opportunity. She assisted. With Lady Bexley's stole, had access to the fan's display, and could slip the blade and fan together in secret. Her loyalty to Lady Bexley made her an inconspicuous messenger, and her secret connection to Duval, who promised her financial reward to recover the fan, gave her motive. He proceeded to the door and beckoned the maid forward. Knees trembled as she approached. Poirot addressed her gently. Mademoiselle, you wished to aid Monsieur Duval, perhaps believing you safeguarded your lady's reputation. Yet in your zeal you overstepped, concealing the fan in Lady Bexley's stole and delivering this blade to threaten us. Helena's eyes brimmed. Monsieur Poirot, he promised he would preserve my lady's name in the scandal. He said the Empress's notes would ruin her reputation unless the fan was returned to him. Poirot nodded. But in truth, he sought to control both objects, to profit from their provenance. You were but his unwitting instrument. He turned to the others. We now have our culprit and motive. Madame's maid, coerced by Duval's blackmail, executed the theft and framing. The secret Clutha, matching abrasion, revealed the tool of her crime. Hastings produced the house steward, who moved to detain Helena gently. Lady Bexley looked at her maid with compassion. Helena, why did you not come to me? Helena's shoulders shook. I was afraid, my lady. He threatened. Lady Bexley placed a hand on Helena's arm, then squared her shoulders. Monsieur Poirot, I ask that Helena's cooperation be considered. She was but a pawn. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Indeed, we shall handle her with mercy. The fan and the blade will be secured, and Monsieur Duval will face justice in absentia. He turned to the assembled, and now, let us reconvene. Tomorrow to formalize the charges and restore the fan to its rightful state. As the household staff moved Helena quietly away, Poirot surveyed the chamber. The fan lay once more in its display, the letter opener sealed in its casket, and the little grey cells could rest, having uncovered the secret clue that unravelled the affair of the ink-stained fan and the ghostly blade. Chapter 11. Tensions. Rise with the maid Helena discreetly escorted away by the house steward. An uneasy stillness settled over the drawing-room. The lamp's glow shimmered off the glass vault housing the fan, as if casting a warning to any who remained. Poirot stood near the hearth, cane in hand, surveying the four principal suspects, Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, and Mr. Grey, whose features were now etched with fresh apprehension. Mise Amos. Poirot began softly. We have unmasked the instrument of the crime. Yet this affair is not concluded. The tension between you has reached a tipping point. Let us speak frankly of the consequences and observe how each of you copes under the strain. A tremor passed through Lady Bexley's composure. She smoothed her gown and drew in a breath. Monsieur Poirot, I thank you for your discretion regarding Helena, but I cannot ignore that my own maid was capable of such actions. I feel betrayed. Her hand tightened on the back of a chair. Miss Sinclair inclined her head. Your ladyship, you have shown remarkable compassion, yet this event has shaken my confidence in those I considered friends. I wonder now if my scholarly trust was misplaced. Colonel Ford shifted his cane, each tap punctuating his restraint. We find ourselves in a strange position, do we not? I have served under kings and presidents, yet I confess I feel a soldier's frustration when I cannot control matters of the heart and mind. Mr. Grey remained motionless, fingers steepled, though his eyes darted from one face to the next. Emotions run high, he observed, but let us recall that true resolve comes not from emotion, but from reason. We must proceed logically. Poirot nodded, acknowledging Grey's attempt at calm. True, monsieur, but even reason falters under emotional pressure. Consider your own stakes. Lady Bexley, your reputation is intertwined with Helena's loyalty. Miss Sinclair, your father's scholarship depended on your integrity. Colonel Ford, your honor rests on your steadiness. Mr. Grey, your leverage in financial circles depends on discretion. He paused, letting the weight of his words permeate the room. I propose we address the next steps, ensuring Monsieur Duval's plot is fully unravelled, and restoring trust among those present. But first, I wish to hear how each of you intends to proceed, given what we now know. Lady Bexley spoke first, voice steady though edged with sorrow. I intend to inform my late husband's estate trustees of Helena's involvement, to ensure that none of Duval's threats can touch my name again. I will also commission an independent review of my household staff. She met Poirot's gaze. I owe it to those I employ to protect their dignity, and to those I assist to preserve the truth. Miss Sinclair's lips pressed together. Shall write to my father, disclosing the events of tonight. Our family's work must remain transparent. I will publish an erratum in the catalogue acknowledging the fan's mishandling, and hope that public acknowledgement will quell further scandal. Colonel Ford cleared his throat. My course is to ensure Lady Bexley's safety. I will request permission to oversee the household's security arrangements. I have contacts in the inspectorate who can monitor any further correspondence from Duval. Mr. Grey stood, walking to the far side of the room. He picked up a decanter of brandy and poured himself a measure. I plan to sever any financial links to Chateau des Fontaines until we have definitive clarity on Duval's machinations. I shall inform my board tomorrow that no further funds will be released until full assurances are given. His words hung in the air as he returned to his place, bearing his glass like a shield. Poirot studied each response carefully, his moustaches twitching as he considered the emotional undercurrents. Very good. Your resolutions demonstrate honor and prudence. Yet the question remains, how will you confront Monsieur Duval himself? He is the puppeteer, and though Helena aided him, the mastermind remains at large. A low murmur rose. Lady Bexley glanced at Gray. He reached out to me last year, secretly offering to acquire private letters of Empress Eugenie for a discreet fund. I declined, but I did not inform the household. Miss Sinclair frowned. I also received a letter from Duval, offering to broker my father's research to Parisian collectors. He promised exclusivity and a significant commission. She brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. I assumed it was routine. Colonel Ford nodded. He approached me, as well inviting me to verify military artifacts from the chateau under the guise of historical consultancy. I thought little of accepting. Mr. Gray placed his glass on a side table, and he approached me about financing certain restoration projects. Each of us had dealings with him, all unknowing pieces of his network. Poirot tapped his cane. Exactly. Duval cultivated each of you, weaving connections that now threaten to unravel reputations. He must be confronted and swiftly. He turned to Hastings, who had entered silently. Hastings, deliver letters to each of our guests, summoning them to my office at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. We shall draft a joint statement and coordinate our actions. Hastings bowed. At once, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot faced the 4 remaining figures. One final point before we adjourn. The phenomenon of trust betrayed has a peculiar hallmarker token left behind by the betrayer. In this case, Helena's trembling confession and the blade's emergence were tokens. Yet I suspect Duval has left one more token, perhaps in the form of a message or mark we have yet to discover. He studied the hearth's hearthstone. Examine it. Hastings, look for any papers or markings beneath the grate. Hastings complied, carefully lifting the grate in the hearth. A folded slip of crested stationery lay tucked inside, its edges singed. Hastings retrieved it and brought it to Poirot, who opened it with a practiced flair. The message read, "Congratulations, mon ami. You have uncovered my pawn, but the game is not over. I will be in touch at dawn. Remember only, I know where the true fan now lies." Poirot's eyes narrowed. So we have one more act in this drama. Duval taunts us with the fan's final resting place. He assumes we are still blind. He turned to the company. We must prepare for Duval's next move may involve further artifice or peril. Be vigilant tonight and meet me at dawn. As the suspects departed Deitch, lost in private reflection, the tension in the house wound tighter. The crackle of the dying fire echoed in the silent room, a reminder that the battle of little grey cells and cunning minds was far from over. Duval's challenge loomed on the horizon, and Poirot's dawn of confrontation promised the final unravelling of threads woven in ink and ambition. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. The first rays of dawn filtered through the tall windows of Hercule Poirot's study, casting a pale glow on the assembled group. Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, and Mr. Gray stood in measured silence, their expressions taut with anticipation. On the antique writing desk, lay the folded note from Monsieur Duval, its message still fresh in everyone's mind. I will be in touch at dawn. Remember only, I know where the true fan now lies. Poirot stood before them, arms crossed, his trademark mustaches bristling with determination. Ms. Amice, he began, his voice calm but imbued with steel. The hour has come to confront Monsieur Duval. His ultimatum is clear. He controls the location of the fan, and he has summoned us. We shall proceed with caution and strategy. He motioned to Hastings, who handed him a carefully prepared bundle, blank sheets of stationery bearing Duval's distinctive fleur-de-lis and crossed quill's crest, along with a freshly inked pen. We shall reply, accepting his terms, but under our own conditions, Poirot explained. He believes we are desperate. Let us show him that we are masters of our own game. He tapped the note. We shall write, Monsieur Duval. We accept your invitation. Meet us in the greenhouse, at dawn alone. Present the fan, and you will not be harmed. Bring proof of its authenticity. H. Poirot, place a servant at each door. We will station ourselves discreetly around the greenhouse. When Duval arrives, we surround him. He will be compelled to surrender the fan or reveal its location. Lady Bexley's eyes widened. The greenhouse, that old glass house at the end of the garden. Exactement. Poirot nodded. It is remote, yet within earshot of the staff quarters. Advance warning will ensure no escape. Miss Sinclair drew in a breath. Should we arm ourselves, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot smiled gently. Arms are unnecessary. The law is on our side, and our numbers will intimidate him. Sufficiently, psychological pressure, mise Amos, is our sharpest weapon. Colonel Ford adjusted his cuffs. Very well. I shall post a footman at the north and south exits. Hastings, alert the gardeners to remain indoors until summoned. Right away, sir, Hastings replied, bowing and hurrying out. Poirot produced a fresh sheet and began to write, his handwriting small and precise. The others watched as he composed the note, sealing it in Duval's crest-embossed envelope. He then handed it to Lady Bexley. Deliver this to the gardener, instructing him to place it on the greenhouse bench precisely at 7 o'clock. We shall gather here at 6:30 and proceed. Lady Bexley tucked the envelope into her reticule. I will see to it. As she left, Poirot turned to the remaining three. Let us review what we know. Duval is aware of our forensic discovery that the fan fit the letter opener on of Helena's confession. He will arrive confident that he retains control. He assumes Helena's cooperation ensures her silence. But she is now under the steward's watch. He will find no accomplice within these walls. Miss Sinclair nodded. He may resort to bluff or threats. Then we must be prepared to call his bluff. Poirot tapped the desk. If he fails to produce the fan, we shall demand location coordinates under oath and then summon the local constabulary. Mr. Gray stepped forward. And if he threatens to destroy the fan, then let him try, Poirot replied, lips curling. Such an act would prove his guilt beyond doubt. No civilized killer of provenance would harm an artifact of this caliber. Colonel Ford surveyed his companions. Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Mr. Gray, trust you will each remain outside the greenhouse, concealed behind the shrubs, ready to encircle him. They each nodded, resolve stealing their features. At 6:30, Hastings led the party through the dew-laden garden path toward the glass house. Its panes, streaked with morning mist, glinted in the dim light. Lady Bexley paused to steady her breath. "I feel as though I walk into a trap," she whispered. Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Trust in our plan, madame, and in the little grey cells." They arranged themselves. Lady Bexley behind a rose trellis to the east, Sinclair by the wisteria arbour to the south, Ford near the north door, and Grey leaning against an ivy-covered wall to the west. Poirot and Hastings remained at the main entrance. At 7 on the dot, a distant footstep echoed on the gravel path. A tall, slim figure emerged from the shadow of the estate, Wallerman in a dark overcoat, his collar turned up against the morning. Chill. He carried a slim portfolio under his arm and walked with deliberate, measured steps. Poirot stepped forward, raising a hand. "Monsieur Duval, I presume." The man halted and lowered the portfolio. "Monsieur Poirot, you have quite the reputation. I see you are a shockingly prompt student." "Punctuality is the hallmark of respectable negotiation," Poirot replied smoothly. "Do you have the fan?" Duval's mouth twisted in a wry smile. "Not physically, but I have proof of its authenticity and its location." He unclasped the portfolio and extracted a small copper box sealed with red wax, bearing the imperial cipher. "Here," he said, placing it on the greenhouse bench. Poirot nodded. "We shall examine this evidence. Meanwhile, if you will open your hands, we shall see whether you hold the fan itself." Duval's eyes narrowed. "You presume I carry it with me?" "Certainly," Poirot replied serenely. "Else why summon us here?" A rustle of movement sounded behind Duval as Hastings and Ford circled the doorway. Sinclair and Bexley shifted positions, their presence now subtly felt. Duval's gaze flicked to each concealed figure, his composure wavering for an instant. "I did not bring it," he said quietly. "It remains hidden at your house." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "Then it was not taken by your accomplice, but remains where you first stole it." Duval's lips twitched. "You forget your own maid's involvement. She returned it to a safe place, a compartment in Lady Bexley's writing desk, sealed until tonight." Sinclair gasped. "In the desk? That desk has a hidden drawer beneath." The veneer pure speculation, but it is known to those intimate with this house. Duval smiled. "Precisely. I instructed her to return it there, believing you would never search your own furniture." He straightened, opened the box. "I think you will find a small fragment of the fan's silk leaf, confirming my knowledge." Poirot moved to the bench and lifted the lid of the copper box. Inside lay a delicately torn petal of the fan's original silk, its painted scene unmistakable. His eyes glowed. "'Twas been a fragment proof indeed. But my dear Duval, your confidence is misplaced." Duval stiffened. "Explain, monsieur." Poirot stepped closer, voice low. "You believed Helena's confession to be irreversible, yet she has recanted under the steward's assurances, and her testimony is secured. The box you present is a token, but you know nothing of our true clue, the compartment in your own coat." Duval's eyes flickered downward as Poirot unbuttoned his overcoat to reveal the letter opener's silver handle peeking from an interior pocket. The blade's scabbard bore the same chip, the same ink stain. A collective gasp escaped the hidden circle. Duval's face drained of colour. "You, Poirot," produced a handkerchief and wiped the blade free. The matching abrasion and chip revealed the union of fan and opener. "You wore the blade, assaying its fit before using it to frame Helena. But you forgot that planting the fan in Lady Bexley's desk would not remain concealed." Hastings stepped forward. Monsieur Duval, you are under arrest for theft, conspiracy, and blackmail. Duval's shoulders slumped. Clever, clever, Monsieur Poirot. He raised his hands in reluctant surrender. As Hastings secured Duval, Poirot turned to the concealed suspects. Mies Amos, our confrontation is complete. The fan shall be recovered intact, and Duval's threats are ended. Lady Bexley emerged, steadying herself. I never imagined my desk would betray him. Miss Sinclair and Colonel Ford joined her, relief and respect in their eyes. Poirot allowed a small smile. Only by uniting observation with psychology can one corner a cunning mind. The confrontation is won, but the consequences, personal and reputational, must now be addressed. He placed the copper box gently in his coat pocket. Come, let us return inside. Justice has been served, but the delicate work of restitution begins now. Together, they walked back through the greenhouse, the morning light illuminating not only the plants but the triumph of the little grey cells over deception and artifice. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape, just as the household settled back into its morning routines. Servants preparing breakfast, the steward arranging lodging for Monsieur Duval. Under guard, a sudden commotion erupted in the hallway. Captain Hastings, who had been conferring with the butler about Constable's arrival, shouted, "He's gone. Duval has escaped his guard." Poirot, standing in the drawing-room with Lady Bexley and the others, stiffened. Mon Dieu, he swept aside a curtain to glimpse the corridor. Hastings, what happened? Hastings pointed down the hall toward the library. When I turned my back to fetch ropes from the cellar, his jailer dozed for an instant. Duval seized the moment. He produced a hidden key from his coat lining, slipped it into the lock of his handcuffs, and freed himself. The guard awoke only to see the cuffs fall to the floor and Duval sprint into the library. Lady Bexley's face drained of colour, but the fan, he must try to reclaim it. Miss Sinclair gripped her hands. We must stop him. Colonel Ford drew his service pistol unloaded for formality's sake and led the way into the corridor. He'll head to the library or perhaps the greenhouse. We must anticipate both. Poirot followed, cane at the ready. Everyone, remain calm. Remember the layout. He swiftly marshalled them, Lady Bexley to the library entrance, Sinclair to the garden door, Ford to the greenhouse path, and Grey to the stairwell leading to the front exit. Hastings flanked Poirot. They entered the library to find overturned chairs, strewn papers, and, most alarming, the glass display case empty. The imperial fan was gone. By Jove, Hastings murmured. He's stolen the fan again. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Not stolen, risked. He believes you recovered it by force, and he seeks to reclaim his bargaining chip. He pointed toward a small, newly broken window pane at the back. He escaped this way. Miss Sinclair knelt beside the shattered glass. He must have pried it from the frame with the letter opener. Yes, Poirot agreed. And now he has the fan and will flee the grounds. He strode to the garden door and flung it open. This way, outside, the morning air was cool and damp. Hastings spotted a dark figure disappearing through the yew hedge that bordered the western wall. There he goes, Hastings called, breaking into a run. Lady Bexley and Sinclair followed Ford along the greenhouse path, while Poirot and Hastings skirted the rose garden toward the hedge breach. Mr. Grey vaulted over the ivy-clad wall near the front gate, aiming to cut Duval off at the exit. As they emerged into the service yard, they saw Duval's coat disappearing round the corner of the stable block. Hastings and Poirot burst through the stable doors to find a muddied courtyard. Duval stood beside a tool shed, clutching the fan's velvet pouch. He spun at their approach, eyes wild. "Back off, Poirot. You are too late." Poirot stepped forward. Calm, in contrast to Duval's frenzy. "Monsieur Duval, surrender peacefully. You have no escape." Duval laughed, a brittle sound. "You have ruined me. I will not be captured again." He hurled the velvet pouch toward the tool shed, then vaulted over a stack of barrels. Hastings lunged to catch the pouch, but tripped over a wooden bucket, sending both man and bucket crashing to the ground. The velvet pouch tumbled near the shed. "Door," Poirot called out. "Secure the fan, Hastings." Hastings scrambled to retrieve the pouch, untying it to reveal the folded fan. He tucked it under his arm as he regained his footing. Meanwhile, Duval disappeared into the warren of service passages beneath the house. Ford appeared, pistol drawn. "He's heading toward the back gates. Quick." Poirot nodded, leading Hastings and Sinclair back through the archway. "Lady Bexley, stand guard here. Colonel, Mr. Grey, intercept him at the gates." They sprinted across damp cobbles to the back entrance, where two footmen alerted by the shout had already barred the door. Duval's frantic pounding echoed. From outside, Poirot called, "Monsieur Duval, there is nowhere left to run." Duval's voice came through cracked timbers. "Open this door, and I'll show you where the real fan lies. Otherwise, I'll destroy it." There was a metallic scrape as he drew the letter opener from his pocket. Poirot motioned to the footman. "Step back." He drew his cane and tapped. "On the door, monsieur, this is your final chance. Hand over the fan and keep your life." Silence followed. Then a muffled crash. The door shook. Miss Sinclair knelt beside Hastings, gently holding the fan's folded ribs. "Keep it safe," she whispered. At that moment, Duval's voice cracked through the door. "I have smashed it beyond repair." Another crash sounded, then the door splintered inward. He burst through, wielding the letter opener. His face was a mask of desperation. Poirot braced himself. Duval lunged toward the fan in Sinclair's arms. Hastings stepped between them. "You will not harm her." The letter opener slid against Hastings's ankle. The blade's tip nicked his leather boot. He recoiled, dropping the fan. It unfolded, revealing its ornate crest. Sinclair caught it mid-air, gripping the guardstick's dot. In that instant, Colonel Ford and Mr. Grey arrived, flanking Duval. Ford's commanding voice rang out, "Drop the blade." Duval froze, eyes fixed on the fan. Poirot advanced and gently plucked the letter opener from Duval's hand. He examined the scabbard's chipped edge. "Your final, desperate gambit." Duval sank to his knees, shoulders sagging. It was all for love of provenance of power. Poirot knelt beside him. "Nothing justifies theft and terror. You shall answer for both." At the same moment, the constables arrived at the back gate, alerted by the footman. They hurried in, taking Duval into custody once more. Hastings offered the fan to Poirot, who inspected it briefly before handing it to Sinclair. She smiled through tears. Safe again, Poirot rose, observing the dawn's light filtering through broken glass. Monsieur Duval's attempt to escape and destroy. Evidence was his undoing. Under duress, he revealed the very items we needed to secure. Lady Bexley approached, placing a gentle hand on Sinclair's arm. "Thank you both." Poirot turned to the assembled party and the arriving constables. "Now the fan is truly safe, and our criminal is restrained." Let us return. Inside there remains paperwork, restitution, and finally, the resolution of this extraordinary affair. With Duval led away and the fan once more secured, the household breathed a collective sigh. But Poirot knew the final piece still awaited. Discovery and ultimate detail to bring true closure to the ink-stained fan and the conspiracies it had inspired. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place late that morning. The household staff assembled once more in the library, where Hercule Poirot presided over the recovered artifacts. The imperial fan, now restored under the glass case, the mother-of-pearl letter opener, sealed in its copper casket, and Duval's original correspondence, neatly refolded on the writing desk. The four principal participants, Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, and Mr. Grey, stood in a semicircle, each awaiting Poirot's concluding revelation. Poirot cleared his throat, his little grey cells having reached their culmination. "Mies Amos," he began, "we have seen the fan stolen and reclaimed, the blade discovered and used, the villain unmasked and recaptured. Yet one final detail has remained hidden, a subtlety that cements our understanding of this entire affair." He gestured to the torn letter on the desk. "Recall this missive, delivered before the fan's disappearance. It bore urgency and fear, but also a distinct odor and aromatic note that many of us overlooked." He held the letter to his nostrils, inhaling thoughtfully. A faint trace of bergamot and iris, an unusual combination. Lady Bexley looked puzzled. "I recall the scent. It reminded me of the hand cream I keep by my escritoire." Miss Sinclair's brow knitted. "And I once used a perfume blend of bergamot and iris for a lecture demonstration." Colonel Ford and Mr. Grey exchanged glances. Poirot nodded. "Exactly." The aroma pointed to one of two sources: Lady Bexley's private cream or Miss Sinclair's educational sample. But our culprit's choice of scent was no accident. It was meant to mislead. He tapped the letter. This letter was penned with a pen dipped in the same ink used on the fan's hinge. Yet if we examine the ink itself, he moved to a small mounted display at the corner, an ivory-handled magnifier and a glass vial of ink residue retrieved from the fan. "Dr. Lemaire, the chemist summoned from London, has analyzed the ink," Poirot reported. "He found it to be a bespoke blend, lamp-black mixed with a rare violet dye, extracted from Iris florentina. Such a combination was popular only among a few collectors, chiefly Monsieur Duval himself, who proudly showcased this hybrid ink at the Paris Salon of 1865. He paused, letting the guests absorb the implication. Miss Sinclair's eyes widened. "I thought Duval used a simple iron gall ink. I never suspected the violet component." Poirot smiled faintly. "We all made that error." Yet Duval's own notes, captured in his portfolio, contained smudges of the same violet dye. When he wrote his threat, he unwittingly used his signature Inca professional habit. He held up the copper box that had contained the fan fragment, and the sealing wax, you observed, bears flecks of the same dye-proof that he prepared both letter and box. He turned to Lady Bexley. "Madame, you recognized the bergamot iris scent, but not its false trail. That fragrance was deliberately applied to the letter, drawn from Miss Sinclair's lecture sample. Duval obtained it by bribing Helena, who had access to Mademoiselle's vanity case." Sinclair's hand flew to her throat. "Helena. She must have given him the sample after we spoke of perfumes." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, Helena, ever resourceful, sought to assist Duval by providing a misleading aroma, something she had seen in Mademoiselle's belongings. He paused, gaze sweeping the group. But the true culprit was Duval, alone the only one with motive, means, and the specialized ink. The maid remained his unwitting accomplice, now safely in protective custody, her confession secured. He stepped aside to reveal a small box containing the chemist's report. Observe the spectrographic analysis. Peaks at 450 and 585 nanometers of Iris florentina extract. No common iron gall ink exhibits such peaks. Only Duval's bespoke formula does. Poirot tapped the vial. This is the final piece that falls into place. The ink itself. It named our mastermind. Mr. Gray exhaled. Brilliant, as always, Poirot. The very medium of his writing betrayed him. Colonel Ford nodded. He could manipulate wax, employ a maid, and slip past guards, but he could not disguise his ink. Lady Bexley laid a hand on Sinclair's arm. I am grateful to you both for your composure and your candor. Sinclair offered a small smile. And I to you for your grace. Poirot raised his cane, signaling closure. And now, Mies Amos. We have the full circle. The stolen fan, the planted blade, the forged threats, and the chemical signature that destroyed the conspiracy. Monsieur Duval's arrest shall be final, and the fan's provenance restored without blemish. He swept an arm. Let us proceed to the Hall of Justice, where the constables await our testimony. This remarkable affair of the ink-stained fan and the ghostly blade is at an end. Its final piece has at last fallen into its rightful place. With that, the group departed the library, each bearing a renewed respect for the power of observation. The case was closed, and justice, as always, had been served. Chapter 15. The final gathering late that afternoon. The grand drawing-room of Lady Bexley's Mayfair residence was prepared for a solemn assembly. Velvet-covered chairs were arranged in a wide semicircle facing the high mantel, where Hercule Poirot would stand to conduct his final exposition. Crystal sconces cast a warm glow, illuminating the polished mahogany floors and the rows of eager faces. The household staff, Captain Hastings, Dr. Lemaire, the chemist, the local magistrate, and, at the centre, Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, Mr. Gray, and even the subdued figure of Monsieur Duval in restrained custody. Soft murmurs ceased. As Poirot entered, cane in hand, his impeccable midnight blue morning coat brushing the rug, he paused in the centre of the semicircle, surveying the assembly with a serene confidence. Madame et messieurs, he began, voice carrying clearly, I thank you all for gathering here at such short notice. We stand poised at the threshold of truth. What has transpired these past 2 days? The disappearance of the imperial fan, the cryptic threats, the forged notes, and the attempted recapture must now be laid bare in full. He gestured toward the central table, upon which rested the fan's protective glass case, the casket containing the letter opener, and the sealed envelope bearing Duval's crest. Here lie the instruments of our mystery. The fan, stolen under the cloak of darkness. The blade, shaped like our prize and used to frame an innocent. And the messages of ultimatum that drove even the most loyal to desperation. Lady Bexley, seated to his right, gave him an encouraging nod. Miss Sinclair clasped her hands, Colonel Ford straightened his uniform, and Mr. Gray folded his arms, eyes sharp. Duval, under the watchful gaze of 2 constables, sat apart but attentive. Poirot removed his gloves and placed them on the table. Allow me to reconstruct the sequence of events. drawing upon each piece of evidence, testimony, and the work of our esteemed colleagues. He first recounted the initial unveiling of the fan, highlighting the momentary gas failure that facilitated its removal. As he spoke, Dr. Lemaire rose to demonstrate the dust tracks on a scale model of the carpet, illustrating how a swift hand could slide the fan along to parallel grooves without disturbing the crests. The audience regarded the miniature recreation in solemn fascination. Next, Poirot turned to the torn letter, delivered anonymously. Its ragged edges bore both ink and scent bergamot, and Iris intended to mislead us as to its author's identity. He nodded to Dr. Lemaire, who then displayed the spectrographic chart confirming the presence of violet dye unique to Duval's bespoke ink. A murmur rippled through the room as the chemist pointed out the telltale peaks at 450 and 585 nanometers. Thus, Poirot continued, we established that our culprit was intimately familiar with both artifacts and ink, yet identity remained concealed until the discovery of the pair's matching abrasion and scabbard chip. He lifted the letter opener and held it beside the fan's guard sticks, the audience leaning forward to see the tiny nick that proved they had been paired repeatedly. Having identified the instrument, we turned our attention to motive and opportunity. Here, Poirot swept an arm toward Lady Bexley, Sinclair, Ford, and Gray. We examine relationships, dependencies, and hidden resentments. Each of you had reason to protect or profit from the fan's provenance, yet only one possessed the willingness to orchestrate such deception. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. The four primary figures exchanged glances. Sinclair's lips trembled. Ford's gaze held steady. Gray's eyes scrutinized Poirot's expression, and Lady Bexley bit her lip in quiet anguish. Poirot resumed. The maid Helena confessed to Duval's blackmail scheme, her loyalty exploited to provide perfume samples and access. Yet she acted under duress, her confession granted under assurances of mercy. Helena, seated among the household staff, looked down, relief and shame mingling on her face. Now, Poirot said, straightening, we arrive at the lodge that binds all pieces together. Monsieur Duval himself. He directed his voice to Duval. Monsieur, you sought to control the fan, to extort its recovery from those you believed vulnerable. You relied on secrecy, chemical disguise, and threats to manipulate this house. But your own craftsmanship betrayed you. The ink, the abrasion, the chip-hole, your hallmarks. Duval's shoulders slumped. The magistrate nodded solemnly. Poirot turned back to the assembly. Mise amis, justice may be imperfect, but here it stands upon incontrovertible proof. The fan belongs to Lady Bexley, not to Duval's greedy grasp. The blade shall be returned to safekeeping, as shall the maid's honour, tempered by clemency. He offered a slight bow to Lady Bexley. Madame, the fan is restored to you. Lady Bexley approached the glass case, gently replacing the fan on its velvet cushion. The room held its breath as the case closed with a soft click, signalling the artifact's return to rightful possession. Poirot concluded, voice warm yet firm. Thus ends the affair of the ink-stained fan and the ghostly blade. Let this gathering stand as testament to the power of observation, reason, and compassion. May we all carry forward the lesson that the finest mysteries are solved not by force, but by the careful interplay of little grey cells. A hush followed, then applause broke out, soft at first, then more vigorously, as relief and admiration filled the chamber. Poirot acknowledged the ovation with a modest nod. his eyes twinkling beneath the flicker of lamplight. Captain Hastings stepped forward to speak on behalf of the household. On behalf of Lady Bexley and all present, I extend our deepest gratitude to Monsieur Poirot, whose extraordinary mind has guided us through deceit and danger to the light of truth. Lady Bexley rose, offering Poirot her hand. Thank you, dear friend. You have not only restored an object of beauty, but you have also shown mercy to the innocent and compassion to the fallen. Poirot bowed, taking her hand gently. It is my privilege, madame. Now, let us conclude with tea. As the gathering dispersed for a celebratory tea complete with delicate cakes and fine silver service, the atmosphere shifted from tension to triumph. Poirot, ever the modest host, accepted his cup but remained vigilant, eyes scanning his companions with the same careful regard that had carried him to victory. The final gathering had been a success, and all awaited the gentle comfort of ceremony, assured that justice and gentility had prevailed at last. Chapter 16. The reveal, the clink of fine china, subsided as the last of the household staff withdrew, leaving only Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, Mr. Grey, Captain Hastings, and Dr. Lemaire in the drawing-room. The low murmur of the early afternoon traffic beyond the windows formed a distant backdrop to the tense hush that lingered in the air. Hercule Poirot stood before the high mantel, his little grey cells poised for one final demonstration. Mise. Amos, he began, voice measured and calm. We have shared tea and congenial conversation. Yet there remains the heart of our affair, the revelation of motives, methods, and missteps. It is time to dismantle each deception with impeccable logic, so that every piece of the puzzle finds its place. He lifted a slender, lacquered box from the small side table and set it open to display the letter opener. Its mother of handle glinting, first our blade, fashioned to match the fan. It was used not only to threaten, but to frame an innocent notice, the chip on the scabbard's edge. He tapped it with his cane. This very chip, when matched against the abrasion on the fan's third guard stick, confirmed that the two objects were paired repeatedly before tonight. Lady Bexley leaned forward, nodding. Sinclair's brow furrowed. Ford's lips pressed thin. Grey's eyes remained inscrutable. Next, Poirot continued, retrieving the spectrographic chart from Dr. Lemaire, the ink, a bespoke blend of lamp black and violet iris, unique to Monsieur Duval's own demonstration at the 1865 Paris Salon. No other ink in England or France matched. These peaks at 450 and 585 nanometers. He tapped the chart. Thus, the very medium of his writing betrayed him, linking the torn letter, the sealing wax on the copper box, and the fan's stained hinge to one hand. Dr. Lemaire inclined his head. The analysis was unequivocal. I have never seen such a signature in any other collector's blend. Poirot turned to the panel of suspects. Now, consider motive. Each of you valued the fan's provenance. Lady Bexley, to honor Empress Eugenie's memory. Miss Sinclair, to preserve scholarly integrity. Colonel Ford, to validate military history. Mr. Grey, to secure financial investment. Yet only one of you possessed both the knowledge and the audacity to orchestrate theft, coercion, and blackmail. He paused, eyes narrowing on Mr. Grey. Mr. Greyor, financial dealings with Chateau des Fontaines granted you early access to its holdings, but your board demanded discretion. When rumors of scandal threatened your investment, you enlisted Duval to recover the fan secretly, believing Helena's loyalty ensured silence. Mr. Gray's composure slipped. Monsieur Poirot, I engaged Duval purely to safeguard the artifacts. I never intended violence or deception. Poirot inclined his head. Intentions irrecoverable once crossed into criminal methods. You provided the funds that enabled Duval's machinations. Yet on the night in question, you maintained distance, believing your proxy would do your bidding. He turned to Colonel Ford. Colonel, you authenticated the fan's military provenance and reported an aged ink stain. Your professional critique earned Duval's distrust, prompting Duval to set the blade, hoping to implicate you as a rogue agent aiming to discredit the fan's authenticity. Ford stiffened. He threatened my honor, my service record. I exposed him. Poirot nodded gravely. Precisely. Duval exploited your sense of duty, and you, Miss Sinclair, whose scholarly zeal Duval admired but resented, found your reputation at stake when he realized you could publish findings that negated his own catalogue, so he employed scent misdirection, using your iris bergamot sample to frame Lady Bexley or you. Sinclair's voice trembled. He took my lecture perfume. I never suspected Helena would betray me. Poirot turned to Lady Bexley. And you, madame, whose guardian patronage Duval coveted, were bridled by the fear that the Empress's private annotations, dinked on the fan's hingewood, expose your early charitable purchase to scandal. Duval's note promised to reveal Chateau de Fontaine's unpublished secrets unless the fan was returned. Lady Bexley's eyes filled with tears. He threatened to publish correspondence that would have ruined my family's name. Poirot folded his hands. Thus, the chain of coercion, Mr. Gray's finances, Colonel Ford's authentication, Miss Sinclair's academic prestige, and Lady Bexley's social standing were all held at risk. Duval preyed upon each of you in turn, using Helena as his instrument. He stepped back and swept his arm toward Duval, seated with captive dignity by the fireplace. Monsieur Duval, you committed theft, false imprisonment of reputation, and obstruction of justice. Your final mistake believing Helena would remain loyal, do you hear? You underestimated the strength of character in this household and the power of observation. Duval's shoulders sagged. I feared only exposure. I thought I was untouchable. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. Even the most meticulous mind leaves a single misstep, a chip, a scent, a spectral peak of ink. These betrayals of craft became the evidence that could not be concealed. He turned to the magistrate, who rose. Your Honor, we have unravelled every deception. I present the fan intact, the blade sealed, and the confession of the maid secured under agreement of leniency. The ink analysis, the abrasion match, and Helena's testimony establish guilt beyond doubt. The magistrate inclined his head. I find Monsieur Duval guilty on counts of theft, blackmail, and conspiracy. Sentencing will follow per the Crown's discretion. Poirot bowed his head to the assembly. Mise armis, justice prevails through reason, not force. May this affair remind us that the finest mysteries yield to the subtle interplay of observation, deduction, and compassion. Lady Bexley rose and approached Poirot, her gratitude palpable. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You have restored more than an artifact. You have restored our faith in truth. Poirot accepted her hand. It has been my honor, madame. Now, let us bring closure to this remarkable tale, and allow the little grey cells to rest. As the magistrate called for formal proceedings, and the constables prepared to escort Duval away, the drawing-room seemed to exhale, relief and dignity returning in equal measure. The reveal was complete, and with it, the final deception lay exposed to the light. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The courtroom's austere formality had given way to the quieter dignity of Lady Bexley's drawing-room by late afternoon. Soft light filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the assembled figures now gathered for a more private reckoning. At the centre, Lady Bexley presided, her posture composed yet reflective. Flanking her were Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, and Mr. Grach, having played a vital role in the resolution of the extraordinary affair. Across from them, Captain Hastings and Dr. Lemaire stood in steady support, while Hercule Poirot took his customary place near the mantel, hands clasped behind his back. The atmosphere was solemn, charged with the weight of recent events and the promise of restorative justice. Ms. Amos, Lady Bexley began, her voice calm but filled with emotion. We are gathered to witness the final outcomes of our ordeal, to ensure that justice is both done and seen to be done, and that the reputations and lives touched by this scandal may begin to heal. She turned to Captain Hastings. Hastings, might I ask you to recount the magistrate's ruling? Hastings bowed respectfully. Certainly, madame. The magistrate found Monsieur Duval guilty on 3 counts: theft of the imperial fan, conspiracy to commit blackmail, and obstruction of justice through the framing of Lady Bexley's maid, Helena. In light of his cooperation during the confrontation, and Helena's pivotal testimony, his sentence was mitigated. He will serve 5 years hard labor, with an opportunity for conditional release after 3, provided he assists further in recovering any additional artifacts he may have secreted away. He paused, meeting each of the principal guests' eyes. Furthermore, the court has ordered the restoration of reputation for Lady Bexley, Miss Sinclair, Colonel Ford, and Mr. Grey. Public announcements will clarify that each was a victim of Duval's machinations and not complicit in any wrongdoing. A murmur of relief spread through the room. Lady Bexley inclined her head. Thank you, Hastings. And what of Helena? Hastings offered a gentle smile. Her Majesty's crown has granted her a royal pardon, acknowledging her duress and her crucial role in exposing Duval. She is free to return to service or to any path she chooses without fear of prosecution. Tears shimmered in Lady Bexley's eyes. She placed a comforting hand on her maid's arm, seated quietly among the staff. Helena bowed her head, visibly moved. Poirot stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. Justice is more than punishment, it is restoration. I have taken the liberty of drafting a formal statement to be circulated among London's collectors and social registers, detailing the facts of this case. It will preserve the integrity of the fan's provenance and correct any lingering doubt. He handed copies to each guest. Colonel Ford accepted one and examined it. A prudent measure, Poirot. Rumour dies only when truth is broadcast widely. Miss Sinclair looked up, hope bright in her eyes. And my father's catalogue, Poirot smiled. An addendum has been published in the next edition, acknowledging the incident and reaffirming the fan's authenticity. Your scholarly work remains unblemished and now bears an example of methodological rigour unmatched in our field. Sinclair nodded, relief evident. Mr. Grey, ever the financier, tapped the statement with a thoughtful expression. I shall arrange for reimbursement of any funds diverted to Duval's schemes and ensure my board issues a statement of contrition for relying upon a rogue dealer. Lady Bexley rose gracefully. Then we may consider our reputations, our relationships restored. Yet I feel that true justice also demands reflection on the human cost. She turned to Helena. My dear Helena, you stood alone against fear and did what was right. You shall remain in my service with a full salary for a year as a gesture of gratitude. Helena's eyes glistened. She bowed deeply. I am honored, my lady. I shall serve you with all my loyalty. Colonel Ford cleared his throat. If I may, Madame, I to have a gesture. I have arranged for a small endowment to the Regimental Museum in Paris, to honor the Empress's legacy and preserve the artifacts that might otherwise be lost to collectors like Duval. Lady Bexley and Sinclair exchanged pleased glances. Ford continued, It is a reminder that history belongs to all who cherish it, not to those who would exploit it. Mr. Gray stepped forward. And I will personally underwrite a scholarship in Miss Sinclair's name to support young researchers of Napoleonic history. Let this be a legacy of collaboration rather than conflict. A soft applause rose, and Sinclair's cheeks warmed. You are too generous. Thank you. Poirot, clearing his throat, addressed the gathering one final time. Mies, Amos, this is the truest expression of justice, recompense forged through communal goodwill rather than mere retribution. We began as strangers bound by circumstance. We end as allies united by principle and, I dare say, friendship. He paused, his grey eyes meeting each person in turn. May the little grey cells continue to guide you toward truth, compassion, and the preservation of beauty. With that, Captain Hastings poured a glass of wine for each guest, and Lady Bexley raised her own in a quiet toast to justice, friendship, and the enduring legacy of the ink-stained fan, she intoned. To justice, friendship, and the enduring legacy of the ink-stained fan, they echoed, their voices ringing with sincerity as the guests sipped their wine. Conversation turned from the events themselves to the lessons learned, the strength of observation, the peril of greed, and the redemptive power of mercy. Outside the windows, London's streets bustled as always, unaware of the quiet drama that had unfolded within these walls. Inside, hearts lightened and spirits lifted, secure in the knowledge that justice had not only been served, but had also been made compassionate and whole. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Lady Bexley's drawing room, casting long, warm beams across the assembled circle. The formalities of restitution and celebration had concluded, but a hush now settled as Hercule Poirot prepared to offer his final reflections. In this sacred pause, every eye turned to the slender Belgian detective, whose little grey cells had guided them through peril, deception, and revelation. Mies Amis Poirot began, voice measured and full of gentle authority. We have traversed a most extraordinary path together. From the first gasp of Lady Bexley at the fan's disappearance, through the false clues and the blade-shaped gambit, the threats from Paris, and the ultimate confrontation in the greenhouse, we have pressed each clue until truth was laid bare. He paused, letting his gaze rest on each face in turn. Lady Bexley's eyes gleamed with gratitude. Miss Sinclair's cheeks were still flushed from the adrenaline of the chase. Colonel Ford stood erect, his military composure restored, and Mr. Gray's analytically calm demeanor bore a new warmth of respect. Reflect, if you will, on the power of the smallest detail. A momentary flicker of the lamps, a pair of parallel tracks on velvet, a fleck of ink upon a stole, the scent of iris and bergamot, the microscopic abrasion on a guard stick. It is in such minutiae that the greatest mysteries hide, and in their patient unveiling that justice is served. He turned toward Lady Bexley. "Madame, you have exhibited grace under trial, compassion toward your maid, and steadfast resolve in restoring your household's honor. Your patronage of scholarship and the arts endures, now strengthened by the integrity with which you have confronted this ordeal." Lady Bexley inclined her head, tears glistening. "Monsieur Poirot, your insight has preserved not only my reputation, but the dignity of all involved." Poirot nodded, then addressed Sinclair. "Mademoiselle, your scholarly dedication tempered by this near tragedy will guide future generations toward rigorous inquiry and the fearless pursuit of truth. May your father's catalogue stand forever as a monument to both history and honesty." Sinclair offered a radiant smile. "I shall endeavor to honor that trust in every research I undertake." Poirot glanced at Colonel Ford. "Colonel, your service to crown and country was tested by shadows of scandal. Yet you have upheld the highest standards of duty, ensuring not only physical security but moral fortitude. May your future lectures on military relics be enriched by the lessons learned here." Ford inclined his head in acknowledgement. "I will carry this lesson into every campaign I recall and into the halls of academia where I teach history." Finally, Poirot faced Mr. Gray. "Monsieur, your keen eye for investment and preservation found a new purpose in underwriting the arts and scholarship born from this crisis. May your future ventures be guided by both acumen and conscience." Gray nodded. Thoughtfully, "I'm resolved to invest in integrity as much as in assets, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot turned inward, addressing the empty spaces where Duval's harsh presence had briefly threatened. "As for Monsieur Duval, he now faces the consequences of his choices. Let his sentence serve as a warning that no scheme, no matter how cleverly crafted, can outwit the meticulous scrutiny of right and reason." He straightened, sweeping a hand toward the fan's glass case. "And here stands the prize of our adventure, the imperial fan, restored to its rightful place, its crease and stain transformed from marks of shame into badges of authenticity. It shall remain a testament not only to Empress Eugenie's refined taste, but to the triumph of perseverance over perfidy." Poirot paused at the mantel, contemplative. "In closing, allow me a humble reflection. Human nature, like these intricate artifacts, contains hidden creases and unseen stains. Yet when we apply the light of observation and the lens of compassion, even the darkest secrets are laid bare, and the greatest injustices undone." He lifted his cane with a final flourish. "Let us therefore depart with hearts lightened by justice rendered, minds sharpened by the power of detail, and spirits united in the knowledge that the little grey cells fueled by logic and guided by empathy remain ever victorious." A stillness reigned before applause, and murmurs of agreement filled the chamber. Lady Bexley stood, offering Poirot a gentle bow, and the others followed. As guests drifted toward the door, renewed laughter and conversation replacing the earlier tension, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. This was his métier, the delicate unraveling of human puzzles, the restoration of order from chaos, and the elegant affirmation that, indeed, the truth always emerges triumphant. And as the last guest departed, leaving Poirot alone with the silent fan and the fading light, he closed his portfolio with a soft click, ready once more to set forth into the next mystery that awaited his little grey cells.